Hi there, investigators. It's time to uncover the truth behind another case. The case of Anel Baez Alvarez. Anel Baez Alvarez was born on March 17, 1998, in Guamachil, Sinaloa, Mexico. She grew up in a family with her father, Aide Alvarez, her mother, Hugo Beza, her brother Omar, and her sister, Aiden. As a child, Anel developed naturally and did not encounter any serious problems. Although she was initially a reserved child, over time, she became confident and charming, always trying to please those around her. Anel's father worked as a tailor, and the family lived a prosperous, close-knit, and happy life. However, everything changed when Anel's mother was diagnosed with cancer in the early 2010s. The whole family took care of her during her difficult treatment. After his wife passed away, the family was deeply hurt, but they did not give up and continued to support each other through the pain. This tragedy brought Anel and Aiden closer together, and they shared everything with each other. During the difficult times, Anel maintained a cheerful and friendly spirit. When she entered high school, she became an ideal daughter, managed the housework excellently, always took care of her younger sister, and got good grades in school. One of her hobbies was cooking for her family. Anel overcame her shyness and became one of the most popular girls at school. She formed a band and became the lead singer, developing a love for love songs, especially the ballad Amore Eterno. At that time, Anel also met her best friend, at least for a while. It was Erunde Elizabeth Gutierrez. They became an inseparable pair, admired by everyone around them and considered the most popular girls at school. Anel and Erunde expressed their friendship through social media. On October 14, 2012, Anel posted a photo with Erunde, expressing her joy at their friendship. She thanked God for giving her the opportunity to be close to Erunde and even considered Erunde a sister. However, as time passed, Anel and Erunde's relationship began to change. Despite being the same age, Anel and Erunde's personalities were completely different. Anel was a sweet girl who enjoyed listening to love songs and spending time with her family. Meanwhile, Erunde lived in a dysfunctional family environment and became increasingly involved in the urban youth culture, commonly known as Guado, in Mexico. Erunde regularly attended musical events, such as the Calibre 50 concert at the closing ceremony of the Carnival in Guamachil in 2014. Erunde had clear political views, having shared on social media about attending a march in support of Joaquin Guzman Lora, also known as El Chapo. It is worth noting that Erunde often expressed her views on social media, unlike her friend Anel. The distance between Anel and Erunde grew over time. In 2014, Anel and Erunde both attended the Guamachil High School of the Autonomous University of Sinaloa, but they no longer interacted as closely as before. Instead, each created their own new group of friends. Anel became close to friends like Melissa, Karim, Manuel, and Maria Jose, who shared the same lifestyle as she did. She was often admired and loved by her group of friends, especially Maria Jose, who had known Anel since elementary school. Anel was always caring and helpful to the members of the group. She was also known for being polite and tidy. However, Erunde began to show a completely different personality on social media. She posted negative and disturbing content on her page, some of which was very alarming. Some of the posts looked like threats and did not make any sense at first. This raised concerns and suggested that Erunde might have serious mental health issues. Erunde's posts did not stop and became more and more suspicious. On March 3rd, Erunde posted another message saying, "Maybe not now, and not tomorrow, but soon. I assure you, I will not tell her anything then, but know that I have destroyed you mentally." Erunde's last post was dated March 16th, in which she wrote, "This really makes me desperate." However, no one knew who these threats were directed at. Rumors began to spread around the school that Arunde was angry with an old friend named Anil because they were no longer friends. Some even accused Arunde of being jealous of her old friend because everyone liked Anil. However, Anil did not care about what Arunde posted on social media. She celebrated her birthday with a big party, and everything in her life seemed perfect. But everything changed on March 19th when Anil did not pick up her youngest sister as usual. Hugo, Anil's father, received a call from the school informing him that his youngest daughter had not been picked up by Anil as usual. At first, he was not too worried and thought that Anil might have overslept or gone out with friends after school. But when he decided to call Anil to check if everything was okay, there was no response. Hugo thought that Anil might still be asleep after picking up her sister. He tried to contact Anil again but received no response. Despite repeated calls, she remained silent, causing Hugo's anxiety to increase. Hugo decided to go home to the Los Fuentes area. When he arrived, he found the front door wide open. Entering the living room, Hugo saw that some of the furniture had been moved, leading him to suspect that a robbery had taken place. He called Anil's name and searched the house desperately for her, but she did not respond. Hugo eventually went to Anil's room and tried to open the door but found it locked, which only added to his worries. Hugo knocked on the door several times but received no response from Anil. So, he broke the door open and entered. What he saw took his breath away. On the floor was Anil's lifeless body. He immediately called the police, who arrived quickly at the scene. When they entered the house, they found Hugo and his 10-year-old daughter sitting upstairs, deeply saddened. The police followed Hugo to a room where they discovered the body of his 16-year-old daughter, Anil. The police found that Anil's body had multiple wounds, and there was blood on the floor. It seemed that the attacker had tried to clean up the blood but failed. Through the autopsy, forensic experts discovered that Anil had been stabbed a total of 65 times. The police believed that the attacker had a close relationship with Anil. This theory was further supported by the fact that the doors and windows showed no signs of forced entry, leading them to believe that Anil knew the attacker and had let them into the house. They even speculated that Anil might have arranged a meeting with the attacker that day. However, when detectives checked Anil's cell phone, they found no information about her inviting anyone to her home. Therefore, they considered it might have been a chance encounter. Since there were no surveillance cameras in the area, detectives decided to interview neighbors. Some reported seeing a slim girl with black hair leaving the house. These statements narrowed down the suspects, and the police focused on a specific individual. They began questioning Anil's close relatives and discovered that they all had solid alibis. They claimed that Anil had no enemies and was very friendly, so they could not imagine anyone wanting to harm her. However, detectives noticed a social media post by Arunde, who expressed surprise at Anil's death. Some people expressed their condolences, but others criticized Arunde and accused her of being the murderer. They posted harsh comments, accusing Arunde of guilt. Arunde deleted her account, but the police were able to gather information in time. They summoned some of Anil's friends to ask about the connection between Anil and Arunde. All of them stated that the two had become estranged and that Arunde seemed jealous of Anil because Anil was more popular. After the interviews, detectives accessed Arunde's social media profiles and found threatening posts she had written months earlier. But the most notable was a post written just hours after Anil's death, in which Arunde wrote, "I was so stupid. Oh my God, what did I do?" Everything seemed to indicate that Arunde had become the sole suspect in the case. However, this information was kept secret because the police were concerned that Arunde might escape before they could arrest her. The agents were waiting for the right moment to act. The case attracted so much attention that hundreds of people gathered at a popular funeral home in Guamuchil to say goodbye to Anil. Annel's friends, relatives, teachers, and classmates cried and hugged each other, unable to believe that Annel had passed away like this. In the crowd, two people stood out, Arunde and her mother. Arunde entered the funeral home with her head bowed, her long black hair covering most of her face. Her outfit was unusual for the hot weather, as she wore a hooded hoodie with long sleeves, as if trying to hide something. Arunde and her mother went to pay their respects to Annel's family. They sat near Annel's coffin, where everyone present was whispering and looking at Arunde with tense expressions, noticing that she seemed very nervous. The police then approached Arunde and asked her to follow them to the police station. Arunde did not resist and went with the authorities. At the police station, the interrogation began. Initially, Arunde claimed innocence, but after a few questions, she opened up. Arunde showed scratches and bruises on her arms and torso, confessing that Annel had inflicted these injuries when she tried to defend herself in December 2013. The incident stemmed from a photo that Annel had posted online, in which they were caught hugging and partially undressed. Arunde did not like the photo because Annel had posted it without her consent. She asked Annel to delete the photo, but Annel ignored her. After a while, Annel finally agreed to delete the photo, but it was too late. Their friendship was irreparably damaged. The situation became worse when a classmate of Arunde's informed her that he had a sensitive photo of her, and she suspected that the photo was the same one that Annel had posted months ago. This made Arunde start thinking about revenge. Arunde had been expressing her anger on social media for a long time. On March 19, 2014, she wrote a cryptic statement on her personal page. Then, she went to Annel's house in the Los Fuentes neighborhood. When she arrived at Annel's house, Arunde brought 2 servings of ice cream and put on a fake smile. She said that she wanted to reconcile with Annel and be friends again. Annel happily agreed and led her into the house. She even invited Arunde upstairs to chat in her room on the 2nd floor, just like before. When Annel and Arunde entered the room, they started chatting and eating ice cream. After a short while, Arunde suggested watching a movie. She said that she was going to the bathroom and asked Annel not to stop the movie. However, instead of going to the bathroom, Arunde went downstairs to the kitchen and grabbed a sharp knife. Arunde returned to the room, hiding the knife under her clothes. She found Annel lying on the bed with her back to the door, giving her an opportunity to attack. Arunde pulled out the knife and started attacking Annel. Annel tried to defend herself but was unable to fight back. She lost too much blood and fell to the floor, becoming the victim of a brutal crime. Arunde became impatient. Knowing that she had to act quickly before Annel's family returned, she tried to clean up all the traces of blood in the house. Even though she used all the rags to clean, there was still too much blood. She could only clean up part of it. She finally went to the bathroom to wash her hands and then took Annel's clothes from the closet to wear. Arunde then closed the bathroom door and left Annel's body there. She left the house, leaving the front door ajar. This story of Arunde's made Annel's relatives very angry because they knew it was a lie. According to them, Arunde's description of Annel was completely untrue. In addition, Annel's friends insisted that they had never seen the photo mentioned in the story. The proceedings moved quickly. 4 police officers escorted Arunde to the juvenile court. After an hour-and-a-half-long hearing, Arunde was found guilty. Although she had carried out a deliberate plan and the murder was intentional, because she was only 16 years old, under Mexican juvenile law, Arunde was sentenced to 7 years in prison. She was transferred to a juvenile detention center. The victim's family thought justice had been served, but they were mistaken. The defense filed an appeal because the trial was held in the wrong venue. A higher court decided to reopen the trial. Despite the expedited process, the verdict was not overturned. This caused widespread public outrage. Hundreds of people shared pictures on social media with posters calling for justice for Anil. Several polls were conducted with over 5 million participants, and the majority felt that Arunde's sentence was unfair. They hoped she would receive a much longer prison sentence. However, after the trial was reconducted, the girl was still sentenced to only 7 years in prison. Hugo met with journalists and expressed his dissatisfaction. Although he was glad that the sentence was not commuted, he believed that Arunde's age should not have spared her from a longer prison term. Hugo hoped she would serve at least the full sentence. But that did not happen either. On July 6, 2016, Arunde's sentence was reduced to 5 years in prison. At the same time, the court also decided that if she behaved well, she could be released earlier. This event attracted dozens of journalists who took pictures of her, forcing state police officers to close the courthouse gates. The case became one of the most high-profile in the country. Hugo was not informed of this hearing, which made him extremely angry. The situation worsened when, on September 23, 2017, another hearing was held to evaluate Arunde's behavior in relation to reforms in the Federal Juvenile Justice Act. As a result, the girl was released after serving only 3.5 years. When Hugo left the court, he was extremely dissatisfied and felt he had witnessed a great injustice. Hugo expressed deep regret that the legislative reforms seemed to favor criminals over victims, and this seemed to be the sad end of the story. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Isabella Rodriguez. Isabella Rodriguez was born in Colombia in 1975 and moved to Florida with her family in the 1990s. They obtained U.S. residency and eventually citizenship in 2002, when Isabella was 27. She married William Hellman, but they divorced in 2015 after a decade together. Isabella then met Louis Bennett online, and they began a romantic relationship. In 2016, Isabella and Louis had a daughter named Amelia. 6 months later, they purchased an apartment in Delray Beach, a city on Florida's Atlantic coast. They married the following month, in February 2017. At the time, Isabella worked as a real estate agent, and Louis owned a small solar panel company. On April 30, 2017, Isabella flew to the Caribbean island of St. Martin to meet Louis, leaving their 9-month-old daughter with relatives. They planned to spend a week on the water, returning home to Florida on Louis's sailing catamaran. After stopping in the British Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico, they arrived in Cuba, where they stayed for a few days. On May 14, the catamaran set sail from Varadero, Cuba, bound for Florida. Isabella called her sister 3 hours later to say she would be home the next day. At around 1 a.m., Louis sent out a distress signal to the U.S. Coast Guard, reporting that his ship had collided with an unknown object and was sinking. He also reported that his wife, Isabella, was missing. A Coast Guard helicopter crew located Louis in a life raft around 4 a.m. and took him to Key West Island, the southernmost part of Florida. The catamaran was found floating upside down at dawn, but had not yet sunk. During an interview with investigators, Louis explained that he and Isabella took turns keeping watch. At the time of the accident, it was Isabella's turn, and Louis was asleep in his stateroom. He woke up to the sound of the collision and rushed on deck, but couldn't find Isabella. He called out her name, but she didn't respond. Louis suspected that the loose mast might have knocked her overboard. Louis also stated that the last time he saw Isabella, she was wearing a life jacket. When he was rescued, a Coast Guard rescue swimmer noticed that Louis's backpack was unusually heavy. Upon inspection, officers found 225 collectible coins in the backpack, but their origin was unclear. Isabella Hellman went missing on May 15, prompting a 4-day search and rescue operation by the Coast Guard. As no signs of her were found, the operation was officially ended on May 18. The authorities were suspicious when Louis Bennett, Isabella's husband, requested a letter from the Coast Guard stating that his wife was presumed dead just 24 hours after the search had ended. The Coast Guard denied the request, as it was outside their jurisdiction to issue such a certificate. 6 days later, Louis announced on TV that he was traveling to Cuba to rent a boat and continue the search for his wife on his own. However, just 3 days after making this statement, Louis claimed to have already returned from Cuba and met with Isabella's sister, saying he had checked hospitals but found no signs of her. Louis expressed his despair and resignation to the situation, stating he was struggling to accept that his wife might be gone. He described Isabella as his soul mate and someone he thought he would be with forever. The next day, Louis and the police attempted to retrieve his daughter from his wife's family, but they refused to relinquish her. Louis ultimately took custody of his daughter with the help of the police, despite the scandal surrounding him. During the dispute, Isabella's sister repeatedly accused Louis of being responsible for Isabella's death. Louis's calm behavior and actions after his wife's disappearance raised suspicions among both Isabella's family and the police. Investigations revealed that Isabella and Louis had frequent arguments after the birth of their child. Family, friends, and neighbors all confirmed this. Isabella had confided in loved ones that Louis wanted to move to Australia, but she was opposed to leaving the United States. On May 30th, Louis gave an interview in which he denied any involvement in his wife's disappearance. He claimed they had plans for a happy life together, but now he was alone and their daughter would grow up without a mother. While investigating Isabella's disappearance, the police also looked into the origin of valuable coins found among Louis's belongings. It was discovered that Louis had previously worked as a first mate on a yacht. The captain of that yacht had a collection of 617 rare coins worth around $100,000, which was discovered a year earlier. While the yacht was unoccupied and docked in the Caribbean, thieves broke in and stole the coins on board. Although the perpetrator was not caught at the time, the yacht's captain later identified the coins found on Louis Bennett as part of the stolen loot, now that the FBI was investigating their origin. This new information led the FBI to obtain a search warrant for Louis's apartment. Previously, 225 coins had been found among his belongings when he was rescued. On June 16, 2017, the search of his apartment uncovered an additional 162 gold coins hidden in a closet. Meanwhile, Louis had relocated to England, where his parents lived, and had taken his daughter with him. However, due to financial difficulties, he returned to the United States and settled into an apartment valued at $125,000, while also receiving insurance payments for a lost catamaran. On August 28, 2017, Louis Bennett was arrested in Florida and charged with stealing coins. He pleaded not guilty. A few days later, a federal judge set his bail at $250,000, which Louis was unable to pay. As a result, he remained in custody while awaiting trial. Additionally, Louis attempted to have his wife declared dead. Louis benefited from his wife Isabella's disappearance by gaining control of their shared property and bank accounts. However, the judge refused to declare Isabella dead twice, as the investigation into her disappearance was ongoing. In a separate case, Louis pleaded guilty to stealing coins and transporting them to the United States in November 2017. Louis's parents asked the judge to be lenient when sentencing him, citing the fact that his daughter had already lost her mother. In February 2018, Louis received a sentence of 7 months in prison followed by 3 years of probation. On the same day, Louis was charged with second-degree murder in Isabella's death. Authorities believed he intentionally caused the catamaran they were on to crash, which was allegedly a staged event to cover up the crime. The prosecutor's case was based on a claim that Louis wanted to inherit Isabella's wealth to pay off his debts and take their young daughter to live in Australia. Isabella had expressed fear of her husband in text messages a few months before her death, stating that she felt he no longer respected her. She expressed fear about returning home. In a message sent months before her disappearance, Isabella wrote, "If you no longer like or love me, let's resolve this immediately. It's sad how you treated me the entire time." An inspection of the catamaran before it sank revealed that the portholes below the water line were left open. The damage to the dual hulls seemed to originate from within the vessel, near the water line. The water line is the point where the surface of the water meets the hull of a floating vessel. An expert hired by the FBI analyzed photos and videos taken by the U.S. Coast Guard of the catamaran before it sank. The expert concluded that Lewis's account of the events was not credible. The analysis suggested that the vessel did not sink due to accidental damage, but rather appeared to have been intentionally scuttled. A professor of nautical architecture and ocean engineering at the U.S. Coast Guard Academy testified in court that the Coast Guard found no evidence of a collision that could have caused the catamaran to sink. Divers inspecting the vessel were cautious due to the risk of collapse, and eventually, the catamaran sank to a depth of over 4,000 feet, preventing a detailed inspection. 2 years after Isabella Hellman's disappearance, a judge officially declared her dead. Palm Beach County Circuit Judge Scott Suskauer issued a series of orders stating that Isabella was presumed to have died on May 14, 2017. Despite the passage of time, Isabella's body has not been found, and she has not contacted her family. Based on the available evidence, it is presumed that Isabella is deceased. The statement said, "In January 2019, U.S. District Judge Federico Moreno suspended Lewis's February sentencing hearing in Miami and rescheduled it for May 28, saying he would not act until Isabella's family could personally visit her daughter Amelia, who turned 3 in July. In November 2019, Lewis pleaded guilty to manslaughter, and the second-degree murder charge against him was dropped. Before the plea deal, he faced a possible life sentence for second-degree murder, but the new charges limited his maximum sentence to 8 years in prison. According to a document filed with the court, Lewis claimed he didn't remember what he was doing when he discovered his wife was missing. He didn't search for her on the catamaran or in the water, nor did he use flares to signal for help. Instead, Lewis packed his belongings onto a life raft and then intentionally damaged the catamaran to make it flood, allowing him to escape on the raft. Prosecutors stated that Lewis waited 45 minutes after realizing his wife was missing to call for help. Notably, the U.S. Attorney's Office pointed out that Lewis was an experienced sailor with training in emergency procedures, having previously sailed from St. Martin to Australia. Don't understand why he failed to use his knowledge to respond to the emergency situation. Prosecutor states that Lewis admitted to being negligent in handing over control of the catamaran to his inexperienced wife, Isabella, resulting in her falling overboard and drowning. Despite being an experienced sailor with a Royal Yachting Association certification, Lewis failed to ensure Isabella wore proper safety gear. In contrast, Isabella had no formal sailing training or experience, and Lewis knew it. Lewis received training in emergency procedures, including man overboard protocols and night sailing safety, but Isabella did not. The prosecutor notes that only Lewis knows the full story of what happened on the catamaran that night. Following Lewis' guilty plea, Isabella's family, through their lawyer, expressed their immense pain and asked Lewis to show remorse. They stated that while Lewis can never undo the harm caused by taking Isabella away, he continues to cause additional pain by depriving them of contact with his and Isabella's daughter, Amelia. Isabella Hellman's family is grieving and missing her dearly. Although they have had limited contact with her daughter Amelia through 3 FaceTime calls, they have not been able to see or hug her in a long time. They long to be reunited with Amelia and provide her with love and care. As a part of their family, they want to be with her. They urged Lewis Bennett to do the right thing. Lewis Bennett, Isabella's husband, was sentenced to 8 years in prison on May 28, 2019, after pleading guilty to manslaughter in connection with her death. During his sentencing hearing, Bennett apologized sincerely to Isabella's family for putting them through immense pain. He acknowledged that his actions led to a devastating tragedy, for which he is truly remorseful. Lewis admitted to making poor decisions that worsened the situation. He expressed regret in federal court in Miami, where he waived his right to appeal as part of his plea bargain. Before the judge delivered the sentence, Lewis requested the opportunity to be released from prison early so that he could continue to care for their daughter, Amelia. Lewis expressed a desire to care for his daughter, saying, "I want to raise her in a way that honors my late wife's wishes." However, the judge ruled against him, sentencing him to 8 years in prison followed by 3 years of supervised release. As a result, Amelia will remain with her paternal grandparents in England for the time being. Hello friends. Welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Donald Alban Blom. Donald Blom was born on February 5, 1949, in Minnesota. He had a difficult childhood, experiencing physical abuse from his father from a young age until his teenage years. As a result, Blom developed behavioral problems and began drinking heavily at an early age. These issues continued into his teenage years, and Blom was eventually sent to a reform school in 10th grade, where he frequently skipped classes. The trauma of his violent relationship with his father likely contributed to his behavioral and alcohol problems, which became more pronounced during puberty. Fast forward to May 26, 1999. Caitlin Poirier was working the night shift alone at a convenience store. After midnight, a customer called the police to report that the clerk was missing. When officers arrived, they found the store empty. Reviewing the surveillance footage, they saw a large man grabbing Caitlin by the neck and leading her out of the store around 11:40 p.m. A man wearing jeans, a backwards baseball cap, and a New York Yankees jersey with the number 23 was seen acting suspiciously near a store. Catherine Hannock, an employee at the nearby Subway restaurant, reported seeing the man behaving strangely before Caitlin's store closed. As she drove home, she coincidentally encountered the same man, who was driving a black Ford F-150 pickup truck with an extended cab and white markings on the side. Hannock followed the truck from a distance and saw it circle the maintenance area several times before entering Moose Lake and stopping in a cafe parking lot. She also noted that Caitlin's car was still in the store's parking lot when she left work. Based on Hannock's description and partially recovered surveillance footage, police created a rough sketch of the suspected kidnapper. The suspect had long blonde hair and looked approximately 25 years old. Based on descriptions from 4 witnesses, a composite sketch was created and shared with the public through local TV and newspapers, seeking information about the person. As the search for evidence continued, hundreds of people from throughout the state gathered to help comb the wooded area around the station, hoping to find the missing Katie Poirier. Police used service dogs and helicopters to search for Katie, but their efforts yielded nothing. Her photo was widely circulated in newspapers and on billboards, making her case a high-profile missing persons investigation. Authorities checked the local sex offender facility, which was near the store where Katie disappeared, and confirmed that all inmates were present and accounted for. This information helped rule out the possibility of a kidnapping by a fugitive offender. Police then focused on searching for a vehicle with a specific license plate number, which led them to Donald Blom. However, the truck at his residence was white, not matching the description of the vehicle they were looking for. The official search for Katie ended on June 6, 1999, without any success. Despite the official search ending, many volunteers continue to look for Katie, hoping that someone might have seen something that could lead to her safe return. Investigators were also waiting for the perpetrator to make another mistake, which could help them crack the case. Maps marked searched areas, but Katie remained missing. 2 weeks later, a man called the hotline, reporting co-worker Donald Hutchinson, who matched the composite sketch and had recently stopped driving his black pickup truck, was absent the day after the abduction and got a haircut. An investigation into Katie's disappearance revealed a surprising discovery about Donald Hutchinson. He was actually an alias for Donald Blum, a man who had a hidden black pickup truck in his garage and owned property just 12 miles from the store in Moose Lake where Katie worked. As investigators dug deeper, they uncovered Blum's dark past, which included convictions for sex crimes involving the kidnapping of petite young girls, much like Katie. With this new information, detectives quickly obtained a search warrant for Blum's property. Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension agents tracked down Blum to a campground 140 miles outside of Richfield and brought him in for questioning. They also discovered that Blum had purchased the Moose Lake property 2 years prior, and neighbors confirmed he had been a frequent visitor until Katie's abduction. Blum's supervisor at the veterans' home where he worked stated that he had never seen Blum's real name, as he went by the alias Hutchinson, and was unaware of his criminal record. Colleagues described Blum as a loner who kept to himself. After his arrest, Blum initially cooperated with authorities but soon requested an attorney and refused to testify. Meanwhile, authorities conducted searches that yielded several items from Blum's home, but no official statement was made about what they found. Meanwhile, the search party resumed their efforts on the second day with increased enthusiasm. Katie's mother remained hopeful that her daughter was alive. On Donald Blum's property, fragments resembling bone were found in a fire pit's ashes. The fragments were sent to a lab and confirmed to be bone. A tooth was also found and sent to forensic dentist Dr. and Norlander for analysis. She used alternative methods to verify the tooth's origin, as DNA in the pulp would have been destroyed. A filling confirmed it was human and matched those used for Katie. Researchers identified it as a young woman's tooth, making it likely to belong to Katie. Katie Poirier's kidnapper, Blum, was charged with kidnapping and unlawful possession of a firearm, a federal offense due to his prior convictions. He was initially unwilling to consider a plea agreement, but later changed his mind, agreeing to testify on the condition that he be allowed to call home on September 8. During his confession, Blum recounted the events of May 26, 1999, stating that he had gone fishing and then returned to his home in Richfield, only to drive back to his Moose Lake residence. On his way, he stopped at a bar for a beer and saw Katie in a store while she was conducting business. Blum, who did not know Katie, grabbed her and forced her into his pickup truck. He then drove her to his home, where he strangled her to death from behind, a process that took approximately 20 minutes. Blum claimed that he did not commit any other type of assault on Katie. After killing her, he placed her body in a fire pit, gathered wood and paper, and attempted to burn her remains. However, Blum's account of the events was inconsistent with the video camera footage and the evidence found in the burn pit. According to Blum, Katie had asked him several times to let her go, but she did not struggle with him until he began choking her. Blum stated that he managed to kill Katie with his bare hands, but his recollection of the events was unclear and contradictory. Blum's account of burning Katie's remains was not believable. He claimed that he had burned her body to ashes using only wood and paper, but this was not possible. When questioned further, Blum admitted that he didn't know why he had made this claim, as it didn't make sense to him. After the interview, Blum contacted 2 local TV stations to report his confession and asked them to leave his family alone. As part of his plea deal, his wife was returned several confiscated items, including a parcel of land, a home, and the family car. However, Blum's confession caused significant distress for the Poirier family, who had been holding on to hope that Katie was still alive. Blum later recanted his confession, stating that it was false and made under duress. He claimed that the isolation of solitary confinement and the medication he was taking had caused him to hallucinate, leading him to tell the authorities what he thought they wanted to hear. A plea bargain was no longer an option, and both the prosecution and defense teams were getting ready for trial. It's not uncommon for people to falsely confess to a crime, and this can happen in a few ways. One type of false confession occurs when someone gives in to pressure from the police or interrogation and admits to a crime they didn't commit. Another type of false confession can occur when people are led to believe by the police that they have committed a crime, even if they didn't, and eventually they start to believe it themselves. Blom's trial began in June 2000 with a 5-week jury selection. The trial itself lasted another 5 weeks with numerous witnesses, including several crucial ones. Assistant Prosecutor Thomas Perler presented the case, and Blom's brother was an initial witness. He testified that he gave Blom a New York Yankees jersey, contradicting Blom's earlier claim that he never owned such a jersey, raising questions about potential perjury. More testimony came from 2 women who had been kidnapped by Blom in 1983. They bravely testified about the harm he had inflicted upon them, providing the jury with a first-hand account of Blom's capabilities. Notably, the women's appearances at the time of the kidnapping bore a resemblance to Katie's. Forensic experts specializing in dental evidence analyzed the partial tooth and confirmed that it matched Katie's age, gender, in dental records. Doctor and Norlander, who had initially been uncertain whether the object was even a tooth, testified that the tooth belonged to Katie. The defense called its first witness on August 7th. Amy Blom, Blom's wife, testified that her husband was at home the night Katie disappeared. From the stand, Amy explained that she inferred her husband's whereabouts after seeing a news broadcast about Katie's disappearance the next day. The location of the disappearance was near their country house on Moose Lake, 110 miles from their home. Given her husband's prior convictions, Amy assumed he would be a suspect, which is why she later recalled his exact location the night before. Blom arrived home at 9:30 p.m. to find his wife already in bed. The next morning, his spouse was still at home, having gotten up to start the day, and she had already made coffee. Blom's spouse also took the stand to testify about her experience with the police officers who had questioned her. She described how they had bullied her, implying that if she didn't answer their questions the way they wanted her to, they would take her children away. She further stated that the officers called her a liar. Additionally, when asked about a baseball jersey, she denied having seen her husband wear one or receiving one from her son-in-law among the clothes he had given them. As she gave her testimony, Blom became visibly emotional, crying and wiping away tears. On August 10th, Blom testified in his own defense. Under oath, he denied kidnapping Katie Poirier. During his 3-hour testimony, he alternated between speaking and crying, claiming his life was in shambles and that he was ill at the time of the crime. Blom admitted to the investigation that he had committed the crime, but later recanted his confession. He tried to gain sympathy from the jury by portraying himself as the victim, claiming he was under distress due to media pressure and his wife's threat to leave him. Blom changed his alibi, now stating that he was not at Moose Lake on the night of the crime. Instead, he claimed he was asleep at home with his wife, as she had previously stated. He admitted to being at Moose Lake earlier that evening but claimed to have returned home by 10 p.m. before Katie's disappearance. Appearing in court ultimately had no benefit for Donald Blom. Many perceived him as someone trying to dodge responsibility for his actions once again. At the conclusion of the questioning, Blom expressed frustration and made a last-ditch request to the judge, but it was denied. The case was then presented to the jury. Following a lengthy 10-hour deliberation, which included a 3-hour review of the recorded confessions, the jury found Donald Blom guilty of the crime. He received a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. Hello friends. Welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Roxana Valdez. Roxana Valdez was born in 1957 in a small village in the province of Punta Arenas, Chile. Roxana married a man whose name is not publicly known, and they had a son together. However, the marriage was not successful, and they separated in 2011. As a single mother, Roxana faced significant challenges in her small village, where job opportunities were limited. The community's main occupation was farming and selling produce, and the local schools focused on teaching agricultural skills. Roxana worked at the Don Gregorio boarding school, which trained students to become agricultural technicians. Her role was a night supervisor, responsible for ensuring the students' behavior and slept at night. She did not have a direct role in raising the children. Roxana's son attended the same boarding school, as she was unable to care for him during the day due to her work in the fields. At the boarding school where Roxana worked, Claudio Muñoz Ramirez was the head of grounds maintenance. His nighttime work schedule led to him meeting Roxana. Despite their 14-year age difference, they discovered they had a lot to talk about. Roxana would often spend entire nights discussing school issues and her failed marriage with Claudio. They also shared commonalities in their personal lives. Claudio had 2 daughters he loved, but he felt disconnected from their mother and had considered divorce multiple times. However, he stayed in the marriage because of a promise he made to her late father. Over time, Claudio seemed to forget his promise and began spending more time with Roxana, away from his family. Eventually, he made a decisive move without explaining himself to his wife. He packed his belongings and left their home to be with Roxana, who happily welcomed him into her life. Their relationship moved forward quickly, but Roxana overlooked some important red flags. She welcomed a man she barely knew into her home, despite having children who needed her attention. As they had enjoyable conversations, Roxana failed to notice that Claudio had a temper and could be cruel. The first major incident occurred at the boarding school, where Claudio was in charge of cleanliness. During a scheduled cleanup day, some students refused to participate, which infuriated Claudio. He threatened to beat anyone who didn't help, despite having no teaching experience. Although it's unclear if he would have followed through on this threat, the students eventually started cleaning. Later, they collectively complained to the principal about Claudio's threats of physical violence. The principal, unhappy with Claudio, asked him to resign voluntarily. This was a significant setback, as the Don Gregorio boarding school was one of the few places in the area that offered stable and decent-paying jobs. After searching for work in fields and at fruit bases, Claudio realized it was a futile effort. He and Roxana decided to look for a better life elsewhere, but they left their son at the boarding school so he could continue his education. They didn't want to take any risks by bringing him along. To avoid relying on employers, who had already let them down, Claudio and Roxana decided to start their own small business, a fruit kiosk. They moved to Molina, a commune a couple of hours from the Chilean capital, known for its vineyards and wine exports. Roxana and Claudio bought a kiosk near their new home, found suppliers for vegetables and fruits, and started their small family business. Claudio took care of purchasing and transporting products, while Roxana handled sales throughout the day. They couldn't afford to hire an employee, as it would add to their expenses, and they worried that someone else might not take care of the perishable goods properly. Claudio became visibly upset and angry when he discovered Roxana was pregnant with their first child. This was a moment that required serious thought, but Roxana, caught up in their new relationship and thriving business, agreed with Claudio's suggestion to give the baby to her relatives to raise after birth. However, Roxana suffered a miscarriage afterwards. Following this, Claudio's behavior changed significantly. He frequently yelled at Roxana and occasionally turned violent. Neighbors, tired of the constant noise, often called the Chilean police, the Carabineros, to intervene in their domestic disputes. One time, when the Carabineros responded to a call, they found Roxana in tears and partially undressed, fleeing the house with Claudio chasing after her. Roxana revealed to the officers that she was suffering from ongoing domestic abuse, which had caused her miscarriage. The incident left her needing psychological support. However, as time went by, they seemed to put their issues behind them and continued living together as if nothing had happened. After the incident, Claudio should have faced charges, but Roxana chose to forgive him and give him another chance. She made him promise that it wouldn't happen again. Although Claudio promised to change, his past behavior with his ex-wife suggested that his words might not be reliable. Sadly, the past repeated itself. Claudio stopped physically abusing Roxana, but he started going out to local bars at night, drinking heavily and spending a lot of their family's money on alcohol and encounters with women. Roxana put up with her husband's behavior, hoping that he would settle down once they had a child. In a way, she was correct. After Roxana gave birth to a healthy child in 2013, Claudio changed his ways. He stopped going out and focused on their business, which was growing and needed more attention. They expanded their business by buying another kiosk and vehicle for transporting products. Roxana also invested in firearms for protection, as they lived and worked in areas that weren't very safe. The family's assets appeared to increase substantially, but this growth was only theoretical. In reality, Claudio resumed his previous habits, wasting money on alcohol and reverting to violent behavior towards Roxana. Roxana's account detailed how the abuse in their relationship escalated. At first, Claudio drank sporadically, but the frequency soon increased. When inebriated, he would return home, accuse Roxana of fictional affairs, and subject her to physical and sexual abuse. His actions seemed intentionally hurtful, even when Roxana was pregnant. This culminated in a miscarriage in August 2012, sending Roxana into a prolonged depression. On one occasion, following his typical routine, Claudio went to a local bar and didn't come back until the next morning. Roxana, accustomed to his behavior, still felt anxious about him. It was later discovered that Claudio had taken 5 million Chilean pesos, equivalent to around $6,000, which Roxana had obtained from selling her mother's house. He spent this money on alcohol and visits to brothels. Roxana was shocked and felt betrayed when she discovered that Claudio had taken the money meant for their shared business, which was hidden in their daughter's room. When Claudio came home late that evening, Roxana confronted him about the missing money. However, Claudio was uninterested in discussing the issue and instead hit Roxana, admitting that he had squandered all the money. This incident was the final straw for Roxana. Without saying a word, she went to their bedroom, retrieved a revolver that was meant for protection against local criminals, and shot Claudio in the chest. Claudio died instantly. Roxana was surprised by her own drastic action and attempted to stop the bleeding from the gunshot wound, but it was too late. The close-range shot from the .38 caliber revolver was fatal. In her testimony, Roxana expressed deep remorse and acknowledged the immorality of her actions. She confessed that when she retrieved the revolver, her intention was not to intimidate Claudio but to kill him. Roxana remembered the numerous times Claudio abused and assaulted her, and how she failed to report him to the authorities due to fear. She was afraid of being alone, especially after they had a child together. After shooting Claudio, Roxana's main concern was how it would affect their daughter if she were imprisoned and the child was sent to an institution. That night, Roxana decided to get rid of the body and report Claudio missing. She knew the police were aware of his frequent disappearances during drinking binges. As a delicate woman, disposing of the body was a daunting task. She decided to remove it piece by piece, using kitchen knives to cut the limbs and head. The process required 5 knives, as they kept becoming dull. Roxana then boiled the dismembered parts in large pots, all while playing with her young daughter, who was unaware of what her mother was doing and what had happened to her father. Roxana's calculated approach to disposing of the body, while trying to maintain a sense of normalcy for her daughter, shows the complexity and desperation of her situation. The day after cooking and cooling the body parts, Roxana packed them into separate plastic containers labeled by body part, hands, legs, head, and torso, and then placed each container into a garbage bag. She loaded the bags into her car and drove to St. Lucia to scatter them on a vacant lot. Before leaving, she cleaned her house thoroughly with bleach. However, upon arriving in St. Lucia, Roxana couldn't bring herself to dispose of the bags, despite finding a suitable location. Roxana was nervous during the drive, constantly feeling like she was being watched and fearing that the police would stop and search her car. This fear escalated into panic, prompting her to devise a backup plan involving her daughter, where she would pretend to rush her to the hospital if stopped by police. She even considered pinching her daughter to make her cry louder and make the situation more believable. Since Roxana couldn't discard the remains, she returned home and hid the bags in the garage. She then cleaned the interior of her car with bleach again and visited Claudio's relatives. She told the police that Claudio had stolen a large sum of money and hadn't been home for days, but they simply shrugged off her claims. Roxana visited her mother and brother, who were alarmed by her condition. She wasn't eating, had a glazed expression, and kept asking the same questions. The only question she answered clearly was about Claudio's absence, claiming he was delayed due to a flat tire while buying goods for their store. Overwhelmed by her thoughts and the hidden evidence, Roxana broke down and asked her brother for help. When he arrived, she revealed everything and showed him the containers. Her brother was shocked. Roxana wanted to unburden herself and share the traumatic experiences she had with Claudio, but she primarily needed her brother's help to dispose of the containers holding the body. However, her brother refused, fearing he would be implicated as an accomplice and face police involvement. He urged Roxana to confess to the Chilean police, the Carabineros, and threatened to do it himself if she didn't. Disappointed but with no alternative, Roxana decided to cooperate. That night, she went to the 4th police station to make a significant statement. The officers, who knew her, initially assumed she was there to report her problematic husband. However, they were stunned by what she revealed. Roxana was arrested on the spot. News of her arrest spread quickly, drawing numerous journalists to the station. As the journalists waited, Roxana was eventually brought out, visibly distressed and in handcuffs. Before being escorted into a police car, she exclaimed, "I was afraid he would kill me one day." At first glance, the case seemed straightforward. Roxana had confessed, provided evidence, and surrendered voluntarily. Nevertheless, prosecutor Monica Bisos was skeptical of Roxana's easy confession and wanted a more thorough investigation. Prosecutor Bisos asked to extend Roxana's arrest to allow for further forensic examination. The goal was to determine if Claudio was still alive when his body was dismembered, which would have led to a longer sentence for Roxana. The judge agreed to a 60-day detention to continue the investigation. At the same time, Roxana's lawyer, Carolina Gutierrez, argued that Roxana committed the crime under extreme emotional distress. This could have been made worse by postpartum depression and the domestic abuse she suffered. Gutierrez highlighted Roxana's cooperation with the authorities and her voluntary confession as reasons for a more lenient sentence. However, forensic results later showed that Claudio died from a gunshot wound to the chest, disproving the prosecution's theory that he was alive during dismemberment. As a result, the factors that would have increased Roxana's sentence were dismissed. Another lawyer, Juan Pablo Cardenas, pointed out that the gun used in the murder was registered. He also noted that Roxana first reported domestic violence to the police just 20 days after they moved in together. Psychologist Rodrigo Valenzuela conducted a medical examination and presented documents to the court showing that Roxana was severely mentally unstable when the crime occurred. This instability, linked to the loss of 2 children, meant she wasn't fully aware of her actions. Additionally, Forensic results revealed that Claudio had a high blood alcohol level at the time of his death on April 17, 2015. Roxana's trial began after a year of investigations and evidence gathering. During the trial, Roxana refused to make statements due to her distress over the media portrayal. Prosecutors emphasized the severity of the crime, but couldn't prove premeditation. The defense argued that Roxana acted in self-defense against a man who had brutally mistreated her for years. The court hearing in Chile lasted several weeks, captivating the entire nation. Prosecutor Monica sought a 15-year prison term for Roxana, the accused. After considering the defense and the jury's input, the judges sentenced Roxana to 6 years in a correctional facility with a relatively lenient regime. Claudio's family, who had hoped for a life sentence or even the death penalty for Roxana, were outraged by the court's decision. They had already been upset when the prosecutor requested a 15-year sentence, which they felt was too lenient. The family attempted to downplay any history of domestic violence and claimed that Claudio, a financially independent businessman, would not have stolen $6,000 from Roxana. Additionally, they alleged that Claudio had confided in them about Roxana's threatening behavior, stating that she would often retrieve a revolver from the closet and threaten to kill him. In a press interview, Claudio's sister shifted the blame to the Chilean state, arguing that the country's judicial system is corrupt and fails to deliver justice, as evidenced by the relatively short sentence given to Roxana, which she compared to punishments for minor thefts. Giselle, Claudio's first wife, spoke out in his defense. She stated that Claudio was never violent during their many years together. In contrast, Roxana frequently started arguments due to her jealousy and possessiveness. Roxana was initially imprisoned, but after serving 2/3 of her sentence, she was transferred to a semi-open education center in Tala for good behavior. She was allowed to stay in contact with her daughter and was eventually released early. The media reignited public interest in the case, and many people were outraged by her early release. However, some individuals, despite viewing Roxana as a murderer, believed her actions were justified because they saw her as a victim. The debate surrounding this case continues to this day. This story emphasizes the severe consequences that can occur when domestic violence is not addressed promptly. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Kimberly Antonakis. Kimberly Antonakis was born in 1974 in New York, USA. She was the only child in the family. Despite the fact that she grew up in love and affluence, she was not pampered. Her parents came from simple families. Nevertheless, her father Thomas managed to achieve considerable heights. He created his own company, which was engaged in computers, earned funds. The man was happy to spend on his favorite daughter and her desires. When Kimberly was a little girl, her parents divorced. The child was left to live with her mother. However, this did not weaken the connection between the little girl and her father. He took her on weekends and spent all his free time with her. When Kimberly's mother found a new man and decided to move to Florida, she faced a choice to stay with her mother or with her father. Since she didn't want to move, the young lady decided to live with her father. Kimberly was very close to her father and enjoyed living with him. As she grew up, she became a well-behaved, sociable child and eventually a stunning young woman with a radiant smile that always lifted her spirits. She had a great sense of humor and a positive attitude. Kimberly was raised in a sheltered environment, surrounded by love and care, which protected her from the harsh realities of life. As a result, she only saw the good in people and was largely unaware of the darker aspects of life. Unfortunately, her open and kind nature would eventually lead to many sorrows. In 1994, Kimberly enrolled at the College of Staten Island. Shortly after, she told her father that she felt ready to live on her own. Although Mr. Kimberly was worried about her decision, he respected her independence and decided not to oppose it. He promised himself that he would do his best to ensure her safety and well-being in her new living arrangements. Kimberly bought a nice apartment for his daughter, located in a wealthy area of the city, and installed an alarm system to ensure her safety. He also purchased a parking space in the garage across the street so she wouldn't have to park far away. To stay in touch, he provided her with a cell phone and a pager. Kimberly did everything in his power to ensure his daughter's well-being. His concerns for her safety were well-founded, given his wealth and her limited life experience. Kimberly was a diligent student who also worked part-time as an accountant at a reputable firm. She had declined her father's offer to join the family business, opting instead to forge her own path. Kimberly led a typical student life, attending parties and socializing with friends. She declined her father's offers to return home, wanting to maintain independence. This led to an unexpected situation when she let friend Liz Pace and her family stay while their apartment was being renovated in early 1995. Kimberly, with a kind heart, invited young people to her lodging. They spent days having fun together. One day, Kimberly and a friend attended a party, getting ready and dressing up. After a fun night of dancing, Kimberly drove them home but didn't go up, citing unfinished business. They hugged goodbye, unaware they'd never see each other again. After visiting the police, Mr. Kimberly, Kimberly's father, went to the parking lot next to her house, only to find that her car was missing from the garage. As he looked around, he spotted a shiny object on the floor near the wall, a small gold earring. He recalled giving his daughter similar earrings and, just in case, picked it up. However, Kimberly was nowhere to be found in the apartment. Instead, he met her guests, including a friend, her boyfriend Joshua Torres, and their 2-year-old child. Although Kimberly was aware of Kimberly's decision, he didn't agree with it. The tenants were worried about the hostess's absence and Joshua offered to help find her. He said he was looking for Kimberly and would assist later. Kimberly returned to the police station, explaining that his daughter had been in an accident, but the officers remained unconvinced. Kimberly decided to speak with Liz Pace, the last person to see Kimberly, and showed her the jewelry he had found. Liz Pace confirmed that she had seen Kimberly wearing those earrings on the night she disappeared. Kimberly then visited the places his daughter frequently went to, talking to many people, but didn't gather any significant information. Joshua suggested searching not only for Kimberly but also for her distinctive car. Kimberly went to the police station for the 3rd time, insisting that he wouldn't leave until they began a search. A detective eventually responded to his appeal, agreeing to take on the investigation despite the usual protocol. To better understand the events surrounding Kimberly Antonakis' disappearance, investigators started by reconstructing her activities on February 28. Kimberly began the day by attending college, followed by a few hours of work. After work, she returned home and had dinner with friends before heading out to a party with a friend named Liz Pace. The evening concluded with their return home around 4 a.m. Following her return, Kimberly went to the parking lot for reasons that remain unclear. Both her apartment and garage were thoroughly searched, but no signs of struggle or foreign fingerprints were found. This lack of evidence suggested either a meticulous cleanup or that any potential intruder may have worn gloves. The most puzzling aspect was the disappearance of Kimberly and her car without any trace, except for a single earring that was found. An analysis of Kimberly's bank account revealed that her last transaction occurred the evening before she vanished, ruling out the possibility that she had run away from home. Based on the evidence, detectives hypothesized that Kimberly was likely kidnapped. The investigation expanded to include additional police officers. Due to the lack of concrete leads, law enforcement considered information from a psychic. Witness interviews began with Liz Pace and Joshua. They revealed 65 calls were made from Kimberly's landline on March 1st. Joshua explained he made these calls to locate Kimberly, who was like a little sister to him. Liz Pace's testimony helped determine Kimberly's clothing in a portrait was created, highlighting her distinctive tattoos, including a scorpion and infinity sign. Meanwhile, a search for the missing car was underway, with checks at scrap metal collection points and other locations where the vehicle might be found. Unfortunately, no positive results were obtained. A check of Kimberly's cell phone was also unsuccessful. Police advised Kimberly to pay attention to any letters or phone calls he received, as they might be from Kimberly's kidnappers demanding a ransom. The Kimberly family remained in a state of uncertainty until March 4. At approximately 2 a.m., emergency services responded to a reported fire at a large, abandoned house located at 86 Woodhaven Avenue in Queens. Multiple fire crews battled the blaze until it was finally extinguished. Upon investigation, a charred body was discovered in the basement of the building. Further analysis by forensic experts revealed the deceased was a woman between 20 to 25 years old, with remnants of long, black hair still intact. There were also signs of tape and evidence that her legs had been bound, with her hands tied behind her back. The most disturbing aspect, however, was that she was alive at the time of the fire, as indicated by the presence of smoke in her lungs. Detectives initially suspected that the body might belong to Kimberly, a missing person. To confirm the identity, dental records were required. Meanwhile, an inspection of the ashes and the air revealed the scent of gasoline, strongly suggesting that the fire had been intentionally set to destroy evidence of a serious crime. Despite the absence of other evidence, the charred body remained, and upon closer examination, specialists found tattoos matching the description of the missing woman. The records from the dental clinic supported the investigation's suspicions, leading to the discovery of Kimberly Antonakis's body. As more details emerged, an eyewitness came forward who often walked his dog in the area. The dog had been acting strangely in the days prior to the fire, appearing nervous and barking at the house for no apparent reason. It wasn't until after the fire and the discovery of the body that the cause of the dog's behavior became clear. She had attempted to escape and called for help, but her cries went unheard by humans. However, the dog's acute hearing allowed it to detect the sounds coming from the basement, explaining its unusual behavior. When questioned by officers, the homeowner revealed that he had visited the building multiple times in recent days. He was trying to sell the house and would regularly check on its condition, collect mail, and pick up receipts. However, he only inspected the house from the outside and never went into the basement. The homeowner claimed he never heard any suspicious noises, and if he had, he would have investigated. Investigators decided to re-question Joshua, as they had some reservations about him. They also found it strangely coincidental that his name started with the letter J. This time, Joshua mentioned a person he hadn't been able to contact the day Kimberly went missing, a young man nicknamed Psycho, a Russian national who had previously dated Kimberly. The detectives looked into this new information and discovered that the Russian had moved to the US with his parents at a young age. As he grew older, he became involved with a gang and had a history of breaking the law. This led to the identification of the first suspect, who was soon taken into custody. During interrogation, Psycho was informed of his former lover's death, but his reaction shocked the detectives. The young man not only denied involvement in the crime, but he also showed genuine emotional distress. Investigators took him to the crime scene to observe his behavior, and it became clear to everyone that they had the wrong person in custody. Later, his alibi was confirmed, leaving the investigation at a standstill once again. The victim's family sought the psychic's help again. This time, she claimed to have seen 4 people involved in the crime. According to her, the kidnappers had initially intended to establish communication but failed. The kidnapping didn't seem to have been planned with a tragic outcome. The psychic concluded that new information would emerge soon. A couple of days later, Mr. Kimberly, hoping to gather some leads, announced a $10,000 reward for information that could help catch the perpetrator. Mr. Kimberly couldn't shake off the psychic's words. He pondered the psychic's statement about the kidnappers wanting to make contact. What could that mean, and what had prevented them from doing so? Upon returning home, he sat at the table and stared at his phone for a while. He suddenly recalled a minor detail from the day Kimberly went missing. He had listened to all the answering machine recordings as he had been expecting his girl to contact him. However, there were no messages, except for 2 blank ones with complete silence. He initially thought it was a technical issue or a problem with the connection. But it later became clear that this was not the case. 5 days after her body was found, the police located her car in a quiet area of town, not far from where her body was discovered. The investigators were hoping to find fingerprints in the car, but it had been thoroughly cleaned. The only evidence they found was her hair and a second earring in the passenger compartment. Although it seemed like a breakthrough, it didn't lead anywhere. Kimberly, her father, was linked to a local mob hit due to his wealth and success. However, detectives found no evidence to support the rumors. Kimberly, grieving the loss of his daughter, denied any involvement and was found to conduct his business openly and honestly. In July 1995, a burglary suspect was arrested at a New York City residence. Surprisingly, he shared information about the Kimberly case. The suspect claimed an acquaintance told him that his friends had kidnapped and killed she by burning her. Upon hearing the unidentified man's name, the officers pieced together the crime. The man in question was Joshua Torres, Kimberly's roommate who had participated in the search for her. Detectives took a closer look at the young man, calling him in for further questioning. Although he denied any involvement in the crime, a lengthy conversation revealed a potentially incriminating statement. He mentioned that if he were the kidnapper, he would have fed the victim Kimberly. This statement raised suspicions since there had been no public mention of the victim's hunger, thirst, or cold, and not even her father was aware of these details. To strengthen their case, investigators examined the suspect's past, finding a criminal record and a pattern of obsessive behavior. He was jobless and financially dependent on his roommate, caring for her child, which gave him unmonitored time to plan the crime. Knowing Kimberly's daily routine allowed him to abduct her and hide her in a vacant house. It was unclear why no ransom demands were made. Analyzing the suspect's calls revealed he lied about contacting Kimberly's acquaintances. The dialed numbers belonged to random individuals with no connection to Kimberly. Suspicious messages on his pager further implicated the suspect, Joshua. He had long been a suspect in the eyes of detectives, and they finally gathered enough evidence to arrest him. During the interrogation, they informed him that Kimberly's ex-boyfriend was no longer considered a suspect. Pressed for more information, Torres revealed that he suspected his friends of being responsible for her murder. Torres claimed that he thought his friends only intended to kidnap Kimberly for ransom and then release her unharmed. He admitted to being an accessory to the kidnapping but maintained that he did not think his friends would resort to violence. According to Torres, the plan was to demand a ransom and then let Kimberly go, but things did not go as planned. The kidnappers became frustrated when their ransom demands were met with silence from Mr. Kimberly. Unbeknownst to them, their calls had been answered by Kimberly's father, and a ransom message had even been recorded. However, due to a technical issue, the recording was not saved on the answering machine. The kidnappers, feeling ignored and angered by the lack of response, decided to wait and see how events would unfold. It turns out the group feared public attention, and the psychics claim that the suspect's name began with the letter J. This information was published and broadcast on TV, creating a cycle of events. Joshua was released on bail after speaking with the police, but then disappeared. Around the same time, Jose was shot while walking with his wife. Jose's wife later told investigators that her husband didn't trust Joshua and had been gathering evidence against him. She claimed Jose felt guilty about kidnapping Kimberly but not about the house fire. He wanted to confess to the police, just as he had to her. The pager messages and suspect statements helped investigators piece together the kidnapping and crime details. 4 men were involved: Joshua, Julio Negrin, Jose Negrin, and Nicholas Brett, also known as Jay. Notably, Julio had previously dated Kimberly and proposed, but she rejected him. The group was united by friendship and a shared criminal past. However, their actions were far surpassed by the horrific treatment of she at the hands of the guys. Nicholas had recently been released on bail, thanks to his mother's intervention, and had received a lenient fine for a crime that could have resulted in a prison sentence of over a year. Joshua had a history of serious offenses, including child abduction, violence against a minor, and illegal possession of weapons, despite his young age. Nevertheless, he too had received an inappropriately light sentence for his crimes. It was evident that Joshua was the ringleader, responsible for coordinating the group's actions. After Kimberly left the party, the men seized her in the parking lot, having apparently been stalking her and waiting for the ideal moment to strike when she was alone. A gun was used to intimidate Kimberly. When she resisted, the perpetrators tied her hands and covered her mouth, eyes, and ears with duct tape. They then put her in the trunk of a car and drove her to an abandoned house, where she was taken to the basement and tied to a chair. To prevent her from making noise, they removed her shoes. The kidnappers told Kimberly that her father owed them money and that she would be released once he paid the debt. Julio was tasked with caring for Kimberly, bringing her food and water twice a day, and keeping her warm. However, fearing the consequences, Julio abandoned the house, leaving Kimberly without food, water, or warmth for 3 days. Once Julio left, the kidnappers informed Joshua, who made an audio recording demanding a ransom of $775,000. Then, the kidnapper called Kimberly's father, leaving 2 empty messages. The kidnappers waited for a response, genuinely confused as to why Kimberly's father didn't contact them. Meanwhile, Kimberly, left unattended, suffered from dehydration, passing out multiple times, yet continued to fight for her life. The kidnappers grew angry and fearful of being caught due to the lack of ransom payment, so they decided to release Kimberly. Upon entering the basement, they found her unconscious and assumed she was dead. To eliminate evidence in the hostage, they planned to get rid of her. During the investigation, officers learned from Liz Pace that Joshua used his roommate as an alibi, directing his accomplices while staying at home with his child. Liz Pace initially claimed she was unaware of Joshua's involvement in Kimberly's kidnapping. However, at the trial, she testified against him. She stated that after being interrogated, Joshua approached her and confessed to all his crimes. However, he then turned violent, physically assaulting her, silencing her, and issuing death threats before fleeing. Some time later, Joshua was apprehended by law enforcement. In an effort to further the investigation, the authorities decided to bring the former friends together, informing them that Joshua had denied any involvement in the massacre. Upon learning of Joshua's denial, Julio chose to cooperate with the investigation, revealing crucial information. This cooperation played a pivotal role in securing Torres' conviction for Kimberly's murder. Ultimately, the trio faced charges of murder, arson, kidnapping, and unlawful imprisonment. During the trial, evidence emerged that Joshua had made repeated attempts to deceive investigators and evade punishment. After deliberating for approximately 10 hours, the jury reached a verdict. Joshua Torres was sentenced to 58 years in prison. Nicholas Brett received the same sentence as the others. Julio Negrin was found guilty of being an accessory after the fact and was sentenced to 2 to 6 years in prison. Tomas Kimberly, the victim's family member, was satisfied with the court's verdict and did not want the perpetrators to receive the death penalty. In his opinion, the death penalty would have been too lenient a punishment. Nicholas Brett was repeatedly abused and assaulted in prison and died of AIDS after serving 2 years. Julio Negrin was released after serving his 2-year sentence. Joshua will not be eligible for release until 2053 at the earliest. Tragically, sadly, Kimberly's father, Kimberly, passed away from cancer in 2005. His family believes that the stress and grief caused by his daughter's death contributed to his illness. The life of Kimberly Antonakis, a beautiful young girl, was cut short in a shocking and devastating manner. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Marie Carlson. In 1974, a baby girl named Marie was born in the Philippines to an ordinary family. Concerned about her daughter's future, Marie's mother made the difficult decision to send her to the United States, where she believed Marie would have better opportunities for success. As a result, Marie was placed in a foster family with a military background, where she met a young girl named Esther, who was the same age as her. 2 young girls quickly became close friends, unaware of a surprising fact that linked them together. What Marie didn't know was that her American foster father was actually her biological parent, making Esther her biological sister. As they grew older, the sisters left their parents' house and decided to start a new life together. They chose to settle in Florida, where they rented a cozy apartment near a karaoke club that soon became their favorite hangout spot. Marie Carlson's life was a vibrant reflection of her favorite color, pink. She had always believed that living a beautiful life was essential, surrounding herself with flowers and lovely things. But everything changed when she met Jeff, and she discovered a new, profound meaning in life: love. They quickly fell for each other, got married, and had a daughter named Paris, a name that symbolized the love and beauty they shared. Despite their happy family life, Jeff remained an enigma. His past and last name were shrouded in mystery. Meanwhile, Marie was driven to succeed in her career. She had set her sights on joining the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, and was studying criminal law to achieve her goal. However, her journey was not without its challenges. As she progressed in her career, the obstacles grew tougher, and despite her best efforts, Marie ultimately left the police service without realizing her dream. Marie's life took a devastating turn due to a mental health disorder that worsened over time. The trauma of being sexually abused as a child left her with deep emotional scars. As a result, her daily life became increasingly painful, and her relationship with her husband, Jeff, began to suffer. The love they once shared started to fade, and their marriage eventually ended in divorce. The divorce was a difficult but necessary decision, as both Marie and Jeff knew they needed to prioritize their daughter, Paris. They agreed that it would be best for Paris to live with Jeff, allowing her to escape the negativity that had been affecting their home. Despite the challenges, they completed the necessary paperwork amicably and with minimal drama. Throughout the long and difficult divorce process, Marie and Jeff remained dedicated to making decisions that would benefit and care for their daughter, Paris. They remained on good terms and continued to care for each other as friends. Marie was grateful for Jeff's support and made it a priority to spend quality time with Paris, never missing a birthday. Marie had faced many challenges, but she remained determined and refused to surrender. Despite her struggles, she never lost hope. One day, she discovered what had been missing in her life: faith. This newfound faith led her to the Emerald Coast Church, founded by the charismatic pastor James Flanders and his wife Tanya. From the moment she stepped into the church, Marie felt a sense of belonging. The warm and welcoming atmosphere, combined with Pastor James Flanders' sincere and heartfelt sermons, made her feel at home. Marie began the process of recovering and healing from her past experiences, working to make amends and move forward. The Flanders, known for their kindness and generosity, had created a sanctuary where people could find help and support. For Marie, the church became more than just a place of worship. It was a loving community that accepted her with open arms. As she surrounded herself with the church's loving atmosphere, Marie began to heal and grow. With each passing day, Marie felt a sense of freedom and joy that she had never known before. She was no longer the lost and broken person she once was. Instead, she was a strong and vibrant individual, filled with hope and happiness. As she looked out at the sunny Florida landscape, Marie's eyes shone with a newfound radiance, reflecting the beauty and joy that had blossomed in her soul. The church was more than just a building, it was a community of people who genuinely cared for one another. For Marie, this small community became a second family, filled with love, light, and faith. From the outside, the church appeared ordinary, but inside, it felt like a warm and welcoming home. The people gathered there were united by their shared faith, and time seemed to stand still as they came together. Marie, however, was hiding a secret. She was pregnant, and the weight of this secret was crushing her. She felt ashamed and fearful, and only a few close people knew the truth. In June 2021, at the age of 37, Marie gave birth to her second daughter, Grace. As the news spread through the quiet town, people began to wonder who the father of the child was. The truth was painful. The father was a man Marie had been dating briefly, but he had turned out to be abusive and hurtful. When Marie became pregnant, he disappeared without a word. Left alone and broken, Marie found solace in the church. The Flanders family and the local community showed Marie and her newborn daughter overwhelming kindness and acceptance. They provided a safe and nurturing environment, filling a vital need in Marie's life by becoming like a substitute family. Through their selfless support, Marie was able to find the courage, optimism, and start the healing process from the trauma of her past. Marie had been feeling trapped in her life, and just 3 months after giving birth to her daughter, she made a shocking decision that left everyone stunned. She posted a mysterious message on social media announcing that she was leaving, not just her city, but also her family and friends behind. Marie had been secretly planning her escape, careful not to reveal her intentions to anyone, fearing they would try to talk her out of it. She only hinted at her dreams and expressed her love for her loved ones, making it clear that she was leaving for good. Her departure left many questions unanswered. Where was she going? What path would she take? And would she achieve her dreams? Marie's loved ones were devastated, worried sick about her safety and unsure of what to do next. The uncertainty surrounding her disappearance only added to their anxiety. Jeff, Marie's ex-husband, was particularly frantic and decided to contact the police to help find her. As the days passed, the worry and fear for Marie's fate only intensified. Marie's sudden disappearance from Fort Walton Beach had barely stopped making headlines when a disturbing revelation emerged. She had left behind her 3-month-old daughter. This news sparked immediate concern from Marie's sister, Esther, who knew her siblings' devotion to her children. "This is out of character for her," Esther said, her voice shaking. "She's always been extremely protective of her kids." Those who knew Marie were shocked by her disappearance. As a mother, she had always been exemplary, particularly with her 7-year-old daughter, Paris. Marie's ex-husband, Jeff, was especially stunned when he learned that she had stopped visiting Paris, as they had been inseparable. Now, at 37, Marie had vanished without a trace. While she had the right to start anew, the police couldn't ignore the fact that she had left her young child behind. The police analyzed Marie's recent messages and discovered a peculiar aspect: her writing style had changed significantly from before. This led them to suspect that she might be under duress or that the messages were fabricated. An investigation was launched, which soon impacted Marie's personal life. Questions arose about the identity of her daughter Grace's father and the nature of their relationship with Marie. However, even Marie's sister Esther was unable to confirm or deny these suspicions. The police were faced with a complex web of secrets surrounding Marie's disappearance, including the mysterious messages and the uncertainty about Grace's father. In an effort to clarify the situation, the police spoke with Tanya and James Flanders. They revealed that Marie had a history of disappearing temporarily without explanation. The Flanders also shared that Marie had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, which could have contributed to her erratic behavior. A few weeks before she vanished, Marie experienced a severe episode of depression. She began taking medication but was forced to stop due to her pregnancy. Feeling extremely unwell, Marie asked the Flanders family to care for her daughter while she rested. After lunch, Marie lay down to rest, and Tanya and Grace went out shopping. James stayed with Marie to keep an eye on her, but he left for a short time to go home. When he returned, he was shocked to find that Marie and her car were nowhere to be found. The Flanders family immediately launched a search for Marie. They scoured the streets, checking the parking lots of every building, but found no sign of her. Then, James had an idea to check the airport, and to their astonishment, they found Marie's car parked there. Using the spare keys, James drove the car back home. When investigators examined the car, they did not find any suspicious marks or evidence that could lead to Marie's whereabouts. The investigators returned to the airport, hoping to find new leads. Their plan was to review the parking lot camera footage, as the airport is required to keep this information on file. They also hoped to find Marie's ticket, which might have her fingerprints on it. However, when they found the ticket, it didn't yield any useful results. The ticket was clean, with no fingerprints or other clues that could aid in the investigation. A search of Marie's car also turned up nothing, and the parking ticket didn't contain any fingerprints. To make matters worse, the cameras in the parking lot weren't working on the day Marie disappeared. This lack of footage was a significant setback for the investigation, leaving the question of whether Marie's disappearance was a tragic accident or a carefully planned escape. As the investigation continued, the police began to suspect that Marie's disappearance might be more sinister than initially thought. They reclassified the case as a murder investigation and shifted their focus to the mysterious father of Marie's child, Grace. The police returned to the church, hoping to find some answers to their questions. Who was Grace's father, and what role did he play in Marie's disappearance? The church, where Marie had found solace, was filled with rumors and speculation. Parishioners whispered about Marie's secret and the plan that had been weighing on her mind. Marie had been struggling with depression and had considered an abortion, but the Flanders family, who were eager to expand their family, had strongly opposed this idea. The Flanders asked Marie to leave her baby with them, while hypocritically offering to help her. Unbeknownst to others, they desperately wanted a second child, despite both being over 40. One parishioner claimed that Marie's baby, Grace, was a reward from above for the Flanders' good deeds. The situation took a turn when Jeff, Marie's ex-husband, arrived on the scene. He was not the father of the child but had information that could solve the mystery. Jeff revealed that he had noticed Marie's pregnancy and had questioned her about the father. Marie lied, saying she was a surrogate mother for the Flanders. However, the investigation that followed revealed the truth. Police spoke with Tanya's friends, who were also church members, and eventually, the truth came to light. It turned out that the father of the child was James, and the conception was natural. This meant that James's wife, Tanya, had to silently accept the situation. The revelation caught the investigators' attention, and the Flanders were summoned for questioning once again. Tanya was the only one who showed up for questioning. She confirmed the information and added that she was present when the child was conceived. According to her, everything happened with the mutual consent of all parties involved. After Marie disappeared, disturbing details about her relationship with James and Tanya came to light. It turned out that James was intimately involved with both women, which was not just infidelity but a form of polygamy. At one point, they even celebrated the child's birthday together, taking a photo of James, Tanya, and Marie posing as a happy family. However, this photo was meant to mislead, suggesting that the celebration was only for Tanya and that Marie was not involved. But after questioning Tanya's friends, the investigation uncovered new information that revealed the true nature of their relationship. Although Tanya claimed that Marie was initially happy with the arrangement, it became clear that this was no longer the case at some point. Marie's feelings for her daughter Grace were stirred after she was born, and she became hesitant to give her up to Tanya. According to friends, Marie's reservations fueled her jealousy of Tanya, sparking suspicion that Marie might not want to surrender her child to her rival and planned to steal James away from her. These rumors swiftly elevated Tanya to the top of the suspect list. Following Marie's disappearance, all Tanya's problems would essentially dissolve, granting her the opportunity to raise Grace solo and retain her status as James's beloved wife. However, 2 months had passed since Marie vanished, yet no leads emerged. Investigators diligently attempted to unravel the mysteries surrounding Marie's disappearance using available tools, including GPS data. Despite its limitations in 2011, investigators focused on analyzing phone records and message logs to gather more information. The records revealed that Marie had accompanied James to the airport, but Tanya was absent. This development coincided with the unexpected visit of Jason, a young priest who often represented James and ultimately chose to share information with investigators. Jason shared with others a conversation he had unintentionally overheard after Marie vanished. James expressed his distress and concern, stating that he would have to leave the country due to Marie's disappearance, but he couldn't disclose the details. He only mentioned that something terrible had occurred during Marie's severe depression. Prior to her disappearance, James had stayed with Marie at a clinic for a few days, while Jason temporarily took his place. Meanwhile, rumors about polygamy began circulating among the church parishioners, which shocked Jason when he discovered them. Upon James' return from the hospital, Jason decided to discuss the matter with him. Jason asked James about his relationship with Marie. James was honest and admitted to having a romantic relationship with both Marie and his wife. He revealed that he and Marie had a heated argument before her disappearance, which escalated into a physical fight. However, James insisted that Marie was alive and well at the time of her disappearance. Following their conversation, James decided to resign as pastor and soon left the city with his family, including Tanya and Grace, to move to Arizona. Shortly before their departure, Marie's family had contacted the Flanders family to collect some of Marie's belongings. As a result, investigators obtained Marie's phone, which may have contained crucial information. The investigation into Marie's disappearance was initially hindered because most of the data on James' phone had been deleted. However, investigators were able to recover some fragments, including a video of James promoting precious metals. This finding raised suspicions, particularly since the case took place in 2011, when digital evidence was easier to erase and surveillance was less widespread. At that time, DNA detection technologies were still in their infancy, making it seem like criminals could easily escape punishment. However, the field of digital forensics was also advancing, and it was this expertise that ultimately helped crack the case. 3 years after Marie vanished, a new program became available that enabled investigators to recover data from phones and computers. This technology allowed them to access messages between Marie and James, which painted a disturbing picture of their relationship. The recovered messages included explicit images, some of which were taken inside a church. Perhaps most damningly, Marie's emails to James revealed her deep desire to leave Fort Walton Beach, fearing the place was cursed. Her messages hinted at her desperation to escape with her child. A chain of unexpected and dramatic events led to the Flanders family's deepest secrets being exposed. Flanders said, "When someone spreads rumors or harms me, I want them to cease to exist." Given James' situation, shrouded in darkness and fear, it's possible he fulfilled this ominous promise. Despite the lack of Marie's body, there was sufficient evidence to issue an arrest warrant for James on charges of second-degree murder. However, the prosecutor faced a significant challenge, convincing the jury of James' guilt without the victim's body. James and his lawyer were in a desperate situation with an uncertain future ahead, so they made a drastic decision as a last resort to try and turn things around. If James revealed Marie's body's location, he would be charged with manslaughter, a crime with a more moderate sentence. After years of anguish, Marie's family agreed to this deal. James's words revealed a disturbing truth. He and Marie had a tumultuous relationship, frequently arguing about her struggles with depression. During one heated argument, Marie physically lashed out at James, and in an attempt to calm her down, he inadvertently knocked her to the ground. Tragically, she lost her life. In the aftermath, James was overcome with guilt and regret. He had unknowingly contributed to Marie's death, and his attempts to revive her were unsuccessful. The investigators eventually discovered Marie's body in the yard of James's house, buried 5 feet underground and wrapped in a blanket. The discovery was a shock to everyone involved, as they had been searching for her for years. The consequences of James's actions were severe. He was convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to 15 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 11 years. His wife, Tanya, claimed to have been unaware of James's crime and was deeply shocked by the news of Marie's death. Marie's body was discovered after a delay, which hindered experts from determining the cause of her death. This delayed discovery may have impacted the direction of the investigation. 5 years later, Marie's family and friends were finally able to lay her to rest and find closure at her funeral. Her sister Esther might have even sung a final song in her honor. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Hannah Clark. Hannah Clark was born on September 8, 1988. By 2020, she was a devoted mother of 3 young children, 2 sweet girls, Aaliyah and Liana, and a rambunctious boy named Trey. Hannah's loved ones remember her as a kind and gentle soul with a bright smile that could light up anyone's heart. She was a selfless and caring mother who gave her all to her children. Hannah's family life was marked by her relationship with her ex-husband, Rowan Baxter, a rugby player for the New Zealand Warriors team. Despite their significant age difference, they formed a strong bond, which deepened over time. Sue Clark, Hannah's mother, struggled to accept Rowan, but Hannah refused to listen to her concerns. People close to Rowan shared negative opinions about him. Sue, Hannah's mother, had a nagging feeling that something was off about Rowan. She perceived him as arrogant and self-centered, which made her uneasy. She was also concerned about the significant age gap between Rowan and Hannah. When they first met, Hannah was a recent graduate, while Rowan was 31 years old. Additionally, Rowan's past relationships were a worry for Sue, particularly since he was still in the process of divorcing his previous wife and was living with her at the time. When Hannah introduced Rowan to her parents, they questioned him about his ex-wife. Rowan explained that he was staying with her due to their son. Eventually, Rowan finalized his divorce and continued his relationship with Hannah. In 2011, he proposed to her, and she accepted. They got married in Kingsley, New South Wales, Australia. The following year, they had 3 children together. Hannah and her family, including her father Rowan, were passionate about sports. However, Rowan's muscular physique, developed during his professional athlete days, was partly due to steroid use, which led to mental health issues. As a personal trainer, Hannah's approach differed from her father's. She was loved by her clients for her kindness, empathy, and dedication, earning her a loyal following. Rowan's approach to training was unique, but his behavior was marred by aggression and inappropriateness, likely caused by steroid use. This made him a poor trainer, as clients don't need someone who makes them feel uncomfortable. Rowan struggled to communicate effectively with people, which negatively impacted his career and finances. As a result, his wife Hannah had to become the primary breadwinner, which further irritated Rowan. He felt emasculated by her success, as she was doing a better job than he was. Despite their financial struggles, they decided to open their own fitness club. However, this decision was largely driven by Rowan's desire to control Hannah's every move and monitor her whereabouts. Rowan's behavior in the store mirrored his past actions at the gyms where he worked. He often felt the need to assert superiority over women. During a private training session with Sue's mother, he showed his cruel side, acting inappropriately instead of showing respect. He dropped Sue, causing her to hit her head and bleed, and laughed at her clumsiness, showing no sympathy. Despite this alarming behavior, Hannah's parents tried to accept him for their daughter's sake. Rowan's control over Hannah was all-encompassing, and he isolated her from her family and friends. He dictated who she could see and when, and even forbade the children from visiting their grandmother and Hannah from communicating with her brother, whom he disliked. As a result, Hannah felt trapped and enslaved, confined to the walls of her own home. Rowan's behavior towards Hannah was also emotionally and physically abusive. He would demand intimacy from her, and if she refused, he would become enraged, taking out his anger on her and the children. After forcing himself on her, he would then apologize insincerely, attributing his behavior to a burst of passion. Hannah's life was slowly under the constant control and cruelty of her husband, Rowan. Their marriage, once filled with love and passion, had degenerated into a nightmare of fear and submission. Rowan's tyrannical behavior had created a toxic environment where Hannah lived in constant terror of his wrath. Rowan's cruelty was not limited to Hannah, he also targeted their children. While some playful exchanges between parents and children are normal, Rowan frequently crossed the line, intentionally hurting and belittling them. When the children cried, he would mock them, showing no empathy or respect for their feelings. For example, a conflict between Rowan and his daughter Aaliyah turned disastrous when Rowan used excessive force, causing Aaliyah to hit her head. The injury was severe enough to require hospitalization and stitches. Instead of taking responsibility and apologizing, Rowan blamed Aaliyah for the incident. This was not an isolated incident, as Rowan had a history of tormenting his children. As an athlete, he would take ice baths after training, but he would also force his children, including his young son Trey, to sit in icy water, disregarding their tears and pleas for mercy. In the same year, Hannah's life took a drastic turn for the worse. Rowan, who had recently become interested in jiu-jitsu, returned home from a training session one day, still pumped up with adrenaline. Without warning, he physically attacked Hannah, grabbing her throat with a tight grip and uttering terrifying words. Consumed by fear, Hannah didn't immediately recognize that she was experiencing domestic violence. However, this incident was far more frightening than anything she had previously endured. As a result, Hannah made up her mind to leave Rowan at the earliest chance. After reaching out to the police, she provided a detailed account of the horrific experience to the officer. The police officer informed Hannah that forcing an intimate relationship without consent is a form of domestic violence. This conversation was a turning point for Hannah, helping her understand the situation and prompting her to take immediate action. She quickly gathered her children and left for her parents' house, trying to escape the abusive situation. Although their divorce was not yet finalized in November 2019, Hannah made the decision to allow Rowan to spend time with their children. However, she was aware that she had no legal authority to control this arrangement without a court's intervention. Even so, Hannah was still uneasy about leaving the children in Rowan's care. To fix his problem, Rowan was struggling to cope with his emotions and sought help from his church's pastor, Christopher. Christopher was a kind and supportive person who was always willing to listen. However, as Rowan began to open up to him, Christopher noticed some disturbing traits. Rowan had a desire for dominance and control, which he occasionally revealed when his confidence faltered. During one of these moments, Rowan confessed to Christopher that he was aware his actions were wrong and wanted to change, but didn't know how. Rowan's admission was a crucial step towards reform, and Christopher's guidance could have been instrumental in helping him. However, before progress could be made, a shocking event occurred. Hannah and her children were walking down the street when Rowan suddenly appeared out of nowhere, grabbed their daughter Lion, and disappeared. Hannah's life was turned upside down by unbearable anxiety and fear for her daughter Lion's safety. For 2 agonizing days, she had no idea where Lion was, and her distress grew by the minute. Hannah turned to the police, who launched a search and eventually found Lion safe and sound with her father. Although Lion was unharmed, the traumatic experience left a lasting impact on Hannah. The police, recognizing the danger that Hannah and her children faced, urged her to file a police report against her ex and obtain a protection order. However, despite the problems her ex, Rowan, had caused, he still had joint custody of the children, which he used to continue manipulating and abusing Hannah. After a meeting with Rowan, the children were returned to Hannah's parents. However, before leaving, Rowan attempted to humiliate Hannah by displaying pictures of her in her underwear on his car, in plain sight of their children. Hannah, enraged, tried to remove the photos, but Rowan responded violently. He grabbed her shoulder, twisted her arm, and punched her in the face, splitting her lip. The attack was only stopped when Hannah's mother, Sue, intervened. As Rowan drove away, he yelled insults. Hannah, traumatized, immediately reported the incident to the police, as it was a clear violation of the protection order. Unfortunately, the authorities were unable to respond in time, which ultimately led to a tragic outcome. It was a typical morning on February 19, 2020. Hannah grabbed her car keys and left her parents' house to drop off her 3 kids at kindergarten. Hannah and her children got into the car, but before they could leave, Rowan jumped in, causing Hannah to become frightened for their safety. She tried to calm Rowan down, but he was furious and began yelling threats and ordering Hannah to start the car and drive away. Hannah carefully drove off, trying not to escalate the situation. As she turned onto Raven Street, the car stopped. In a desperate and vengeful act, Rowan grabbed a canister of gasoline from under the car seat and drenched Hannah and her children with it. Michael ZCK, who happened to be nearby, witnessed the horrific scene. He said that earlier that morning, he had heard a car pull up outside his house. Hannah, frantic and pleading for help, screamed that Rowan was trying to kill her and pouring gasoline all over them. As Hannah begged for mercy, Rowan refused to let her go, his face twisted in a rage. Michael rushed to the car and was met with Rowan's emotionless face, holding a lighter in his hand. In the next moment, the car erupted in flames. The explosion was followed by blood-curdling screams, a deafening ringing, and then an eerie silence. Luckily, Hannah had narrowly escaped the inferno, but was left with severe burns and bleeding. Frantically, she pleaded for assistance, not for her own suffering, but for her children who remained trapped in the blazing car. A car happened to drive by, and a doctor who was not on duty stopped to offer assistance. Seeing Hannah's distress, the doctor rushed to her side. Meanwhile, Michael intervened quickly, grabbing a hose from his house to try and extinguish the flames. However, the fire was too intense, and it engulfed the entire car, leaving no hope of rescuing the children. The doctor and Michael yelled at Hannah to take cover and get away from the fire, but she was too consumed by grief to hear them. With growing desperation, Michael rushed to the car to rescue the children, but the intense flames and scorching heat thwarted his efforts. Hannah lay on the road, her body badly burned, repeatedly begging for someone to save her children. At that moment, no one grasped the full extent of the tragedy. Hannah's body was severely burned, with over 97% of her skin damaged, except for her feet. Despite her excruciating pain, Hannah's thoughts were consumed by her children, who were now left vulnerable and unprotected. Hannah's badly burned body left police doubting her survival chances. Yet, she refused to give up. With fierce determination, she provided a crucial testimony. Police officer Angus Cook carefully recorded every word Hannah spoke as she struggled to recount the events leading up to her tragic situation. With great difficulty, Hannah managed to name her ex-husband, Rowan Baxter, as the person responsible for her ordeal, and provided a detailed account of what had happened. As Hannah's voice grew weaker and her body frail, Officer Angus remained by her side, offering words of encouragement and praise for her bravery. He reassured her that she had already done enough and that everything would be okay. Hannah was on the brink of death, yet she didn't fully grasp the horror unfolding around her. When questioned about whether Rowan had threatened her earlier, she replied that he hadn't. As doctors approached to alleviate her suffering, she lost the ability to speak. Meanwhile, Rowan Baxter's behavior was erratic. Despite suffering severe burns covering 80% of his body, he managed to exit the car unassisted. Rowan sat on the road, staring at the burning vehicle. After a brief moment, he inexplicably climbed back into the car, which was engulfed in flames. A witness, putting their own life at risk, attempted to extinguish the fire at the back of the car. It was then that Rowan retrieved a knife from the vehicle and began to chase people away, preventing them from putting out the flames. The children, trapped in the burning car, had little chance of survival. Nevertheless, bystanders refused to give up their efforts to save them. Rowan refused to let anyone approach the car, claimed them to a horrific death. In a final, selfish act, he stabbed himself with the knife. Despite her own life-threatening injuries, her primary concern was for the health of her children and her desire to reveal the truth. Tragically, Hannah passed away in the hospital on the same day, at the young age of 31. Hannah was a victim of severe domestic violence, which also affected her children. She fought tirelessly to protect her family from their abuser, but sadly, her efforts were ultimately unsuccessful. Throughout her daily struggles, Hannah showed immense courage, standing up for her loved ones despite the numerous challenges she faced. For days later, a massive gathering took place to pay tribute to Hannah and her children. A lasting memorial, Hannah's House, was also created in Camp Hill, where a tree planting ceremony was held in her honor, accompanied by a plaque that tells the story of her life. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Vashti Seacat. Brad Seacat was born on March 3, 1976, in Kingman, Kansas, to Janet Seacat and her husband, whose identity and background remain undisclosed due to a previous marriage. Janet had a son, Robert, from a prior marriage, making Robert Brad's older half-brother. The Seacat family has a history of good law enforcement, leading to a strict and disciplined home environment. Although details about Brad's childhood are scarce, it is known that he attended high school in Kingman. Brad was physically strong and athletic, which led him to participate in high school wrestling and bodybuilding. His efforts paid off as he excelled in inter-school tournaments, often taking first place and gaining recognition as a star wrestler and prominent figure in his school. At 16, Brad met Vashti Seacat at a major wrestling competition at the Kansas City Coliseum. Vashti was born on March 21, 1977, in Argonne, Seward County, to Julie Hosteler and Clinton Forrest. She was the third of 4 children, with an older brother, Rich, and sister, Catherine, and a younger sister, Tyler. Vashti was a social person with many friends, but she struggled with feelings of inadequacy. However, this didn't hold her back from becoming a cheerleader for her school's wrestling team. She enjoyed watching the team win and attended every match, including the one where she met Brad. Brad was immediately smitten with Vashti and asked her out. Impressed by his confidence, she accepted, and they felt an instant connection at their first meeting. From that moment on, they were inseparable. After high school, Vashti attended a university, while he followed in his family's footsteps by enrolling in the police academy. As a result, they spent less time together, which caused Brad was starting to exhibit controlling and possessive behavior. Over time, Brad's growing jealousy became unbearable for Vashti, and she eventually ended the relationship. Although the breakup was not dramatic or traumatic, it marked the end of their romance. After graduating from the police academy, Brad joined the sheriff's department in Sedgwick County, a short distance from Kingman. Despite his professional accomplishments, he couldn't shake off the feeling of emptiness. He still had strong feelings for Vashti, and his love for her lingered deep within him. Brad didn't abandon his dream of reuniting with Vashti, and as soon as the chance presented itself, he visited her. His words struck a chord with Vashti, who sensed his sincerity, possibly due to his devotion to faith or genuine affection. This led her to decide to return to him. Overjoyed by her decision, Brad hastily approached Vashti's family to express his true intentions and request her hand in marriage. The Seacat family was thrilled to hear the news, convinced that their marriage would be a successful one. The wedding took place in 2004, after which Brad and Vashti settled in a neighborhood in Kingman. As they began building their new life, they befriended Monty Weldon, a friendly neighbor who frequently invited them to backyard barbecues. Brad's unpleasant behavior causing problems due to his controlling personality. However, when Vashti became pregnant, their issues appeared to fade away. In 2006, they welcomed their first son, Brandon, and 2 years later, their second son, Bronson. Although Brad was a loving father, he sometimes had a rough way of interacting with the children, especially during playtime. He treated the children like adults and occasionally showed a more aggressive side. Brad's behavior was concerning. He once beat a prisoner by hitting his head against a concrete wall, causing a fractured skull and brain damage. The prisoner later died from his injuries. Brad was sued for using excessive force, but his boss, Sheriff Gary Steve, supported him, and the charges were eventually dropped. The prosecutor's office and the Kansas Bureau of Investigation dismissed the complaint, clearing Brad of any wrongdoing. Brad showed no remorse for his actions and even admitted to his colleagues that he liked to use violence, especially against individuals he considered bad people. On a separate occasion, Brad and another officer restrained a defendant who became unruly and resisted being removed from the courtroom for contempt of the judge. This incident earned them recognition, and the police chief awarded both officers bronze medals for their actions. On the other hand, Vashti wants to pursue her career despite her love for her children. She searched for a job and succeeded with her efforts. She became the new human resources director at Vito Communications Company. However, Brad seemed unhappy about her new role. He wants Vashti to focus only on family work and her children's education. As a result, he started complaining about Vashti spending too much time at the office. The number of arguments between Vashti and Brad increased significantly. Despite her best efforts to repair their marriage for the sake of their children, Vashti feels her efforts are in vain. She had a feeling that their situation would eventually end in disaster. To resolve the conflict, Vashti and Brad began attending sessions with social worker Connie Sodman. During her first sessions, Vashti expressed feelings of extreme loneliness and isolation, suggesting that couples therapy sessions might be their last hope to save their marriage. Every time Vashti mentioned the possibility of divorce, Brad became angry. For weeks, he repeatedly threatened to kill her if she left him, boasting that he could take her life without consequences because he was a police officer. He claimed he could make her murder look like a suicide, and even mentioned burning down their house to destroy the evidence. After the argument, Brad threatened her, saying that if Vashti pursued a divorce, he would prevent her from seeing their children, even taking them out of the country if necessary. At the same time, Brad left his police job and began working as a self-defense instructor at the Kansas Law Enforcement Training Center. Meanwhile, Vashti continued to attend therapy sessions and made positive changes in her life, such as exercising regularly and eating healthier. A few months later, Vashti's social life began to flourish. She makes new connections at work and meets someone she is attracted to. However, she confided in her sister about her new relationship out of fear that Brad might find out and take revenge. Vashti openly shared with her colleagues about the various threats she received from her husband. Unbeknownst to her, Brad discovered her personal diary and brought it to his office, where he scanned and printed out many pages. He then spends his days researching topics including suicide, fire injuries, and the difference between murder and suicide. In the first week of April 2011, Vashti had her final counseling session with Connie to prepare for her divorce from Brad. Together, they created a safety plan for Vashti and their children. When Brad received his divorce papers on April 29th, he overreacted. After discovering the papers, Brad finds a projector in the pantry and uses it to enlarge a handwritten note from Vashti's diary. At the same time, he also wrote a farewell message to his children. What's amazing is that he also printed out documents on how to disguise a murder as a suicide. Additionally, Brad asked the maintenance staff how to properly destroy computer hard drives, and he used a blowtorch to destroy them because they contained images that were unfavorable to him. Then he threw the rest in the trash. Later that day, Brad bought gas at a convenience store and put it in his truck. That evening, he asked Vashti if he could spend the night at home to say goodbye to his children and promised to leave the next morning. However, he also tries to persuade Vashti to reconsider the divorce and becomes increasingly threatening when she refuses to change her mind. Vashti and Brad had a disagreement that evening, which resulted in Vashti going to bed exhausted around 3:15 a.m. Meanwhile, Brad entered the bedroom with a gun and shot Vashti in the neck. A neighbor who was awake and watching TV thought she heard gunshots but felt it wasn't concerning enough. Brad then staged his suicide by placing the gun next to Vashti's body. He poured gasoline into the hallway and upstairs bedroom and took Vashti's phone to call himself, creating an alibi. After getting his children, Brendan and Bronson, to a safe location, Brad started a fire. The fire spread quickly, engulfing the main room and igniting the remaining cartridges in the gun. At 3:45 a.m., neighbors were startled awake by the fire. Shortly thereafter, at around 7 a.m., Brad called 911, reporting that his wife had taken her own life. When emergency responders arrived, the first floor of the house was on fire and Brad was waiting in the car with his children. A police officer asked if anyone was still in the house, and Brad said that only his wife was there. He fabricated a story that Vashti had shot herself out of depression, and before doing that, she asked him to take the children to a safe place. Brad claimed he tried to save Vashti but was unable to do so because of the intense smoke and fire. When firefighters finally extinguished the blaze, they discovered Vashti's body on the bed in the master bedroom. An important detail attracted the attention of investigators. A .44 caliber revolver was found below Vashti's body, the barrel pointed toward her feet, and a 5-gallon gasoline barrel lay middle of the bed. 2 days later, investigators found Vashti's diary in her car, which contained a handwritten note and a suicide note. Forensic examination revealed that Vashti died instantly from a gunshot wound to the head and also suffered gunshot wounds to the torso and thighs. However, blood and lung tests showed no signs of smoke or carbon monoxide inhalation, which is typically present in the body of a person killed in a fire. The extent of the burns on Vashti's body made it impossible to determine whether her death was a murder or suicide. Police discovered some inconsistencies in Brad's story. It is worth noting that there was no dirt, blood, or wound on his body. Additionally, the position of the gun with the barrel pointing downward raises suspicions that this was not a suicide. Special Agent David Fetty of the Kansas Bureau of Investigation questioned how the gun came to be under the body. He pointed out that if Vashti shot herself while lying down, the gun would fall to the floor. If she sat up, the gun would still be on the right side of the bed. Furthermore, the trajectory of the bullet does not support the theory that Vashti shot himself behind the right ear. David decides to investigate further when some details don't seem to add up. Police found documents explaining how to make a murder look like a suicide. While analyzing Vashti's diary entry, they noticed her handwriting did not match her other entries. Forensic scientist Dennis McFarr concluded that the note had been tampered with. Witnesses also reported seeing Brad destroy a computer hard drive the day before. A neighbor who heard the fatal gunshot testified that the incident occurred at 3:15 a.m., 45 minutes before Brad called 911. This information confirms David's suspicions that something is wrong. Police arrested Brad on May 13, 2011 and charged him with first-degree premeditated murder and 2 other counts related to putting his sons, Brendan and Bronson, in danger. During interrogation, Brad claimed that Vashti felt insecure and depressed because of their troubled marriage and his threats to take the children away. Brad also claimed that after filing for divorce, Vashti was overcome with depression and remorse, so she set a fire and shot herself. However, the police did not believe his story. The trial began on June 10, 2013. Deputy Attorney General Amy Haley shared her account of the events with the jury, emphasizing that no one was more aware than the police of the devastation of fire and its destructive ability to erase evidence. Regarding the projector, the defendant claimed that he only used this device for practical training to guide students. A forensic examiner testified about a forged letter and the destruction of a hard drive. The defendant claimed that he destroyed the hard drive to protect personal information, not to hide anything. The defendant's attorney, Roger Falk, argued that Vashti had suffered from depression since high school, a condition that had worsened after taking some kind of sedative. Brad's brother testified in court, corroborating his brother's account that Vashti had been depressed and sad for weeks before her death. In contrast, therapist Can reported that although Vashti was initially depressed due to marital circumstances, it was not a clinical mental health problem. The therapist said Vashti has been very worried about her future lately. Vashti's brother also recounting the emotional turmoil Vashti's children had endured as a result of their parents' circumstances. The prosecution portrayed Brad as a manipulative person who used his police powers to distort the truth. Yet the defense repeatedly argued that Vashti's death was a suicide and pointed out that even the medical examiner could not determine the cause of her death. Brad testified in his own defense, describing himself as a loving husband and devoted father who was saddened by his wife's desire for a divorce. Kingman County Judge Larry Solomon was accused by Brad that the judge had an incentive to rule against him to win a nomination to the Kansas Supreme Court. However, the jury ultimately found Brad guilty of premeditated murder. Judge Solomon sentenced Brad to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years and an additional 6 years for other crimes. Brad will not be eligible for parole until he has served more than 31 years. In handing down the sentence, the judge took into account Brad's not guilty plea, his dishonest attempt to avoid responsibility, and his lack of remorse. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Adrienne Robert. Adrienne Robert was born on January 4, 1983, in Brunswick, Maine. She graduated from Leavitt High School in Maine in 2001 and the University of Maine at Augusta in 2005. 2 years later, in 2007, she relocated from Maine to Clearwater, Florida. Those who knew her described Adrienne as a beautiful, kind person, always happy and vibrant. At the time of her disappearance, Adrienne was in a relationship with her boyfriend, Justin, and they were planning to start a life together. She was renting a house with her friend Jay. As their relationship progressed, Adrienne and Justin found a new house in July 2012, where they intended to move in together. On the evening of July 13, 2012, Adrienne decided to throw a goodbye party before moving out. Adrienne told Justin that she and Jay would be going out to a movie or a bar. Justin couldn't join them because he was busy with some other things. He didn't object to Adrienne spending the evening with Jay, as they were close friends. Initially, Adrienne and Jay celebrated at home, reminiscing about good times and having a few drinks. Later, they decided to continue the night out and went to the Diamond Dolls strip club. Jay called 911 at 3:34 a.m. to report that he had found his roommate, Adrienne, unresponsive. He told the operator that they had been at a nightclub earlier, but Adrienne had left before him. When Jay arrived home, he discovered Adrienne on the bathroom floor, her eyes open but not breathing. There were also signs of a struggle, suggesting a crime had taken place. The 911 operator instructed Jay to focus and perform CPR on Adrienne, guiding him through the process. Jay followed the instructions, attempting to revive Adrienne until the paramedics arrived. Unfortunately, by the time the ambulance arrived, Adrienne was deceased, and the medics were unable to help her. She was pronounced dead at the scene. The police investigation aimed to answer two key questions: who was responsible for Adrienne's death, and was her roommate involved? The police began by thoroughly searching the house, checking every closet and under every bed to ensure the perpetrator was not hiding inside. Detectives and forensic experts observed that there were no signs of forced entry on the front door when they first arrived at the crime scene. Adrienne's body was found on the bathroom floor, wearing only a bra. A stab wound to the chest was the cause of death. The signs of a struggle in the bathroom suggested that Adrienne had tried to defend herself, leading detectives to suspect that the killer was a man. The detectives had to wait for the autopsy results to get more information. While searching Adrienne's bedroom, they noticed that someone had cut off a piece of her bed sheet. It seemed like the killer was trying to destroy evidence, possibly to eliminate any DNA they may have left behind. However, it was puzzling that the killer didn't take the entire sheet, as the remaining part could still contain DNA. Further investigation revealed a substance similar to seminal fluid on the sheet, which was sent to the lab for analysis. Additionally, Adrienne's car was missing from the parking lot next to her house, suggesting that the killer may have stolen it. The police launched an investigation into the crime, searching for potential witnesses and issuing an alert for the victim's car. To piece together the events surrounding Adrienne's death, detectives needed to gather as much information as possible about her final hours. Before proceeding, however, they had to break the devastating news to her family. Adrienne's parents were stunned by the revelation, struggling to come to terms with the loss of their beloved daughter. Justin discovered the shocking truth the morning after, when he saw police surrounding her house. He immediately sensed something was terribly wrong. The detectives then broke the devastating news: Adrienne had been killed the previous night. Given that perpetrators often return to the crime scene, and Justin's close relationship with Adrienne, the detectives felt compelled to investigate him as a potential suspect. In cases like this, it's standard procedure to investigate the people closest to the victim first. Later that day, police found Adrienne's car abandoned just a few blocks away from her house, with the headlights still on and the keys in the ignition. This discovery further supported the investigators' initial theory that the killer had likely used Adrienne's car to escape the crime scene. Forensic experts thoroughly searched the interior of Adrienne's car for any clues that could help crack the case. Meanwhile, investigators reviewed the CCTV footage to identify the person who was driving the car. Although there were no cameras at the exact location where the police found the car, neighboring buildings had cameras that captured footage of the area. After examining the recordings, investigators spotted a man wearing shorts, a baseball cap, and long hair. The man was seen walking away from Adrienne's car around the same time the 911 call was made. He was heading in the opposite direction, which made it essential for investigators to track his next move. Unfortunately, their attempt to follow him was thwarted when they discovered that he turned a corner where there was no surveillance camera. The investigators rewatched the footage multiple times, hoping to pick up on a detail they might have missed initially. The police had difficulty gathering clear information about the man in the recording because it was taken at night. However, interviewing witnesses provided new leads. A neighbor reported seeing Adrienne and a man running past his house on the sidewalk at night. This was unusual for two reasons. It was late, and they didn't appear to be going for a run. Adrienne was wearing a dress and holding her shoes, while the man was not dressed in athletic attire. Although the situation seemed suspicious, Adrienne didn't appear to be in distress, as she wasn't screaming or calling for help. As a result, the neighbor didn't think much of the incident at the time. To reconstruct the events leading up to the 911 call, investigators spoke with Adrienne's roommate, Jay. Jay had gone to the club with Adrienne and claimed to have found her on the bathroom floor. During questioning, Jay told the detective that he and Adrienne had a few drinks at home before heading to Diamond Dolls, a club they often visited to unwind and escape their daily problems. Jay told investigators that he and Adrienne walked to Diamond Dolls because they had been drinking and didn't want to drive. The police focused on the club because it attracted a questionable crowd. Jay claimed they arrived around 10:30 p.m. and stayed for several hours. While they were sitting at a table, a stranger with a beard and a baseball cap joined them. Later, Adrienne decided to leave, and Jay said he stayed behind. He noticed the stranger had also left. To verify Jay's story, investigators reviewed the club's surveillance footage. They found a camera with a wide angle that recorded everyone entering and leaving the club that evening. The footage showed Jay and Adrienne arriving at the club, appearing calm and normal. Another camera at the entrance provided a clear view of people's faces and clothing. CCTV footage confirmed Jay's account of events. It shows him leaving the club alone at 2:53 a.m. and walking towards his house. The footage also reveals that Adrienne left the club earlier, at 1:38 a.m. Notably, she was seen wearing a dress and what appeared to be a jacket when she arrived at the club, but only wore the dress when leaving. This discrepancy raises a key point. Shortly after Adrienne departed, a man wearing a baseball cap rushed out of the club, presumably to return the jacket she had left behind. After returning the jacket, the man and Adrienne appeared to be engaged in conversation. The exact topic of their discussion remains unclear. Rather than returning to the club, the man followed Adrienne. After exiting the parking lot, they turned right onto a relatively isolated street with few houses. It is unclear whether Adrienne felt threatened or uneasy at this point, and this may remain uncertain. After reviewing the evidence, investigators determined that the man seen on camera at the club and the man near Adrienne's abandoned car were two different individuals. Based on the circumstances surrounding her death, they believed the man from the club's CCTV footage was the likely culprit. The other man may have been an innocent bystander. The police were exploring all possible scenarios to provide answers to Adrienne's parents as soon as possible. Adrienne's family traveled to Florida to collect her belongings. Investigators met with her parents, Mark and Dolores, and assured them that they would do everything possible to find and bring the perpetrator to justice. According to her parents, Adrienne was a friendly person with no known enemies. She had a good relationship with her boyfriend, Justin, and her roommate, Jay. Investigators suspected that Adrienne did not know her killer. The laboratory report soon arrived, revealing that male DNA was found on the sheet, Adrienne's body, and the walls. Although the killer had attempted to destroy evidence by cutting out part of the sheet, forensic experts were still able to recover the DNA. However, when the investigators compared the DNA to the database, they were disappointed to find no matches. As a result, the police had the DNA of an unknown suspect in CCTV footage from the club where Adrienne spent her last evening. Detectives focused on the footage as the key to solving the case. They re-examined the recordings, this time reviewing both daytime and nighttime footage, which led to a breakthrough. Approximately 8 hours before Adrienne's death, investigators spotted the same man who had been talking to Adrienne in the parking lot and had left with her. This time, they got a clearer view of his face. To determine how the unknown man arrived at the club, investigators reviewed the footage and saw that he had taken a taxi. The taxi's phone number was visible on the recording, making it easy to identify the taxi company. This new information made it simpler to identify the man. Detectives discovered at the phone number that ordered the taxi was caught on footage near Diamond Dolls, and it belonged to Thomas Frederick. By comparing his driver's license photo with the image of the man on the CCTV footage, detectives confirmed that it was the same person. As a result, Thomas Frederick became the primary suspect in the case. The police required concrete evidence to arrest Frederick, but the surveillance footage alone was insufficient. To gather more evidence without alerting him, they began secretly monitoring his activities. Their goal was to obtain his DNA sample discreetly, as they were concerned that approaching him directly might scare him off. For a week and a half, the officers tracked Frederick's movements, following him to work and keeping a watchful eye on his home at night. Their patience eventually paid off when Frederick discarded a cigarette butt on the road. The officers collected the butt and sent it to a laboratory for DNA analysis. The purpose of the test was to determine if Frederick's DNA matched the samples found at the residence of Adrienne Robert. While waiting for the test results, the police continued to secretly monitor Frederick, as they suspected he might attempt to leave the state at any moment. After receiving the laboratory report, everyone's anticipation was met with an unsurprising conclusion. The DNA analysis revealed that the samples found on the sheet, walls, and Adrienne's body all belonged to Thomas Frederick. As a result, the police arrested and brought him in for questioning. During the interrogation, Frederick claimed to be a frequent visitor to various clubs and bars, where he would often meet new people. When shown a picture of Adrienne, he stated that they had met at Diamond Dolls, where she had bought him a drink and they had danced and talked. However, when the police confronted him with CCTV footage that contradicted his alibi, he changed his story. Frederick then claimed that he and Adrienne had walked together to the end of the street before parting ways. When asked if he had ever visited Adrienne's house, Frederick responded that he couldn't remember due to his intoxication. This inconsistency cast doubt on his entire account, leaving it unclear what he was trying to conceal. The man initially claimed he had no recollection of being at Adrienne's house. However, it was revealed that a witness had seen Adrienne running barefoot while the man chased after her, which suggested that he was lying. When questioned by the investigators, Frederick provided an explanation. He claimed that Adrienne asked him to escort her home and that she began running suddenly after deciding she was in a hurry. She took off her shoes, prompting him to chase after her in order to stay by her side. Despite Frederick's shifting story, detectives uncovered compelling evidence. A DNA test showed that Frederick's DNA was on Adrienne's sheet and numerous items throughout her home. Frederick altered his story after receiving the DNA test results, now he's claiming self-defense when confronted about his inconsistent explanations. Suddenly remembering past events he couldn't previously recall, Frederick finally shared an apparently factual narrative about how things actually occurred. They spent an intimate time in Adrienne's home where things ultimately became grim and both engaged. A confrontation between Adrienne and Thomas Frederick turned violent and resulted in a physical fight. During the altercation, Adrienne pulled out a knife and threatened Frederick, who then defended himself. Unfortunately, Adrienne was fatally injured in the process. After the incident, Frederick panicked and fled the scene instead of calling for emergency assistance. He feared being blamed for Adrienne's death. As a result, Frederick was charged with first-degree deprivation of life and appeared in court in January 2014. During the trial, the prosecutor presented a different account of the events. According to the prosecution, Adrienne and her friend Jay had been drinking at home before heading to Diamond Dolls, where they met Frederick. The three of them socialized and chatted casually. However, the next day, Adrienne decided to leave the club early to move into her new home with her partner, Justin. Frederick allegedly took advantage of the situation and followed her, despite her attempts to evade him. He chased her to her home, broke in, and attacked her with a knife from the kitchen. The prosecutor stated that the injuries on Adrienne's body suggested that she was forced to have intercourse with Frederick. Fearing she would report him to the police, Frederick decided to kill her. In an attempt to cover his tracks, he cut out a portion of the sheet where his semen had stained, but this effort was unsuccessful. The police were still able to find his DNA on multiple surfaces, including Adrienne's body. Frederick then took Adrienne's car keys, drove a short distance, and abandoned the vehicle. During the medical examiner's testimony, Adrienne's parents, Mark and Dolores Robert, left the courtroom, unable to bear the details of their daughter's final moments. Mark Robert later explained, "I didn't want to hear that. It won't bring Adrienne back, and I didn't want to know what she endured." It was clear that Adrienne had put up a fierce struggle. Her parents have since struggled to cope with life without their daughter. The grieving family member acknowledged that the healing process would be a long and difficult one. "We're still reeling from the loss of our loved one, and it will take time to recover," Dolores said. "However, we will eventually rebuild our lives, as that's what Adrienne would have wanted. It won't be easy, but we will get through this." During the trial, the defense team attempted to tarnish Adrienne's reputation by claiming that she had invited Thomas Frederick to her home for consensual sex. However, this assertion is baseless and may have been a desperate attempt by the perpetrator to justify his presence at the victim's house. The evidence, however, tells a different story. The presence of DNA points to one person, Thomas Frederick. The defense also claimed that Frederick acted in self-defense. She did sustain a stab wound as he was fighting her. Thomas Frederick was found guilty of first-degree murder and car theft. His claim of self-defense was rejected due to insufficient evidence. Although he was accused of killing Adrienne, there was no evidence to suggest he forced her into a sexual act by threatening her with a knife. Thomas Frederick, 25, was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Adrienne's father expressed relief and satisfaction with the verdict, stating that while it wouldn't bring his daughter back, justice had been served. He found it difficult to remain calm in the presence of the man who murdered his daughter, especially since Frederick showed no remorse or sympathy, even after the verdict was read. Adrienne's parents, Mark and Dolores Robert, were overcome with emotion in the courtroom, but felt a sense of relief and happiness when the verdict was announced. They remembered their daughter, an always happy and lively person whose smile could light up a room, and expressed sadness that they would never see her again. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Ollie Kemp. Alexandra Ollie Elizabeth Kemp was born October 11, 1982, in Leawood. She was the oldest of 3 children and the only daughter of her parents. After graduating high school with honors, Alexandra enrolled at Kansas State University. Following her freshman year, she returned to her hometown of Leawood for summer break. During her break, Alexandra took a part-time job at a local outdoor swimming pool near her parents' house, where her younger brother Tyler already worked. The pool was a quiet neighborhood spot, catering mainly to local residents, and it still operates today. On June 18, 2002, Alexandra reported to work on an overcast day, because resulted in fewer visitors than usual. At 5 p.m., Tyler arrived at the pool to start his shift, but his sister Alexandra was nowhere to be found. Her phone and purse were still on the table where she usually sat, which made Tyler confused and worried. He immediately called his parents to report that Alexandra had vanished. Their father, Roger Kemp, rushed to the scene and began searching for his daughter. He first checked the pool, but it was empty. Next, he went to the small pump room near the pool, which contained equipment for water purification, a ladder, and other items. Upon entering the pump room, Roger didn't see anything out of the ordinary at first. However, he soon noticed a leg protruding from under a tarp. As he lifted the tarp, he was met with a horrific sight: his daughter Alexandra, brutally beaten and naked from the waist down, with multiple bruises on her face and body. Roger quickly called 911 and spoke with the operator. When the ambulance arrived, Roger was performing CPR on his daughter. The paramedics took Alexandra to the hospital, but despite their best efforts, she sadly did not survive. Alexandra was declared dead shortly after arrival at the hospital. An examination revealed that the cause of death was strangulation, despite the presence of multiple severe injuries. A thorough investigation found no evidence of forced intimacy, although her body was partially unclothed. The police collected DNA samples from Alexandra's body and secured the pool area, searching for clues to identify the perpetrator. Evidence of a struggle was evident in the room where Roger discovered Alexandra's body, including her flip-flops found in separate locations. Additionally, an open bottle of antiseptic gel and its cap were found at the scene. A few days later, while the police continued to investigate, Alexandra's family and hundreds of mourners gathered to pay their respects at a funeral ceremony. Phil Howes, Alexandra's boyfriend since high school, was initially suspected in her death. As a pool administrator, he worked the morning shift on the day of her death, and Alexandra arrived at noon to start her 5-hour shift. Although Phil often stayed after work to spend time with Alexandra, he left promptly after his shift that day because they had plans for the evening. Despite being an early suspect, Phil had a solid alibi and was quickly cleared by the police. In an interview with detectives, Phil mentioned that Alexandra often felt uncomfortable being alone at work because some of the lawn maintenance workers would stare at her and try to flirt. The police investigated the lawn workers, but each of them had an alibi. However, the inquiry wasn't entirely fruitless. Several workers reported seeing a suspicious man with a video camera lurking in the bushes near the pool the day before Alexandra's death, apparently watching the female lifeguards in swimsuits. The police were given conflicting reports about Alexandra's final hours. Some people said she left the scene in an old Ford pickup truck, while others mentioned different circumstances. A study of Alexandra's mobile phone activity revealed that she had made plans with a friend, Laurel, to meet on the day she died. However, Alexandra didn't show up. When Laurel went to the police station to give her account of events, she explained that Alexandra had asked her to come to the pool to keep her company until her shift ended. According to Laurel, the pool was empty that day due to the poor weather, which made Alexandra anxious. When Laurel arrived at the pool at around 2:30 p.m., she didn't see Alexandra anywhere. Instead, a man she didn't know emerged from the pool house and waved at her with a smile. Laurel thought this man might be Alexandra's boss, and she decided to leave so as not to get her friend in trouble for socializing during work hours. At the time, she had no reason to think that anything was amiss. The police investigation led them away from Alexandra's workplace and to a completely different suspect. As a witness, Laurel provided a detailed description of the person she believed committed the crime. The police used this description to create a sketch of the suspect, who was identified as a white man around 30 years old, with a stocky build, short brown hair, and driving a 1980 Ford pickup truck. The suspect's identity was narrowed down when someone recognized the description as matching James Strader, a local mechanic who owned an old Ford pickup truck. James was questioned by the police and appeared to match the sketch, but he denied any involvement in Alexandra's death. His employer verified his alibi, stating that James was at work on the day of the murder. As a result, James was released from custody. While the police had eliminated James as a suspect, forensic analysis of evidence collected from the crime scene revealed male DNA on an antiseptic gel tube and on Alexandra's body. Unfortunately, the DNA did not match anyone in the police database, leaving the case still unsolved. Alexandra's family, friends, and boyfriend were ruled out as suspects after DNA tests showed no match with the DNA samples found on her body. The investigation was driven by Alexandra's father, Roger Kemp, who was determined to find his daughter's killer. After losing his child, Roger felt like he had lost his purpose in life. However, he found a new reason to keep going: justice for Alexandra. In an interview, Roger explained his approach: "You can either give up or keep fighting. I chose to fight." Impressed by his dedication, the police department gave Roger a workspace where he could collect and share information, and collaborate with the investigators. As they explored all available leads, Roger and the investigators contacted the popular TV show America's Most Wanted and asked them to feature Alexandra's case. The show's producers agreed, and her story was aired. The episode generated hundreds of calls from viewers with potential tips. Although the authorities thoroughly investigated each lead, none of them led to a breakthrough, and the case stalled once again. In February 2003, 8 months after Alexandra's death, a promising new lead emerged. Following a thorough investigation, police in Utah apprehended a suspect. 3 separate witnesses, including 2 women and a 14-year-old girl, came forward to report being forced into intimate encounters with a man. He had managed to evade capture initially, but was eventually tracked down and arrested in Utah. The arrested individual was identified as James Strader, the same person who had been questioned by Kansas police earlier. Notably, James bore a strong physical resemblance to the suspect's composite sketch. James was questioned by the police, but they failed to collect his DNA sample at the time. This might have been because his employer had convinced the police that James was at work on the day of the crime and had not left the premises. Despite this, James denied any involvement in Alexandra Kemp's death. Although he resembled the suspect in the composite sketch, James claimed he had not been near the pool on the day of the crime. He eventually provided a DNA sample for analysis. The results indicates that his DNA did not match the DNA found on Alexandra's body or the antiseptic gel tube. James was later imprisoned for unrelated charges, and the investigation into Alexandra Kemp's death hit a dead end once again. A year after Alexandra's death, the police still had no leads. Roger Kemp, Alexandra's father, and Phil House, her boyfriend, continued to fight for justice. Phil, who was also the president of the student community, sent the composite sketch of the suspect to students at other universities via email and asked them to watch an episode of America's Most Wanted that featured Alexandra Kemp's case. A year had passed, but the police and relatives' efforts had yielded no results in the Alexandra Kemp case. Undeterred, Roger Kemp, Alexandra's father, continued his quest for justice. He reached out to the America's Most Wanted program again, requesting a rerun of the episode about Alexandra's death. The show's creators asked if there were any new developments, and although Roger replied that there were none, his determination impressed them, leading to the episode being aired again. The rerun generated a fresh wave of calls to the police, prompting Roger to offer a $25,000 reward for any information that could help identify the person responsible for his daughter's death. The city of Leawood authorities increased the reward to $50,000. Roger also distributed flyers featuring his daughter's photo, a sketch of the suspect, and details about the reward. As Roger drove along the highway, he noticed billboards and realized they could be an effective way to raise awareness about the case. He began contacting advertising agencies to inquire about the cost of posting the information on a billboard. When he called the Lamar Advertising Company, the owner refused to take his money, offering to display the information on multiple billboards for free instead. Raja decided to publicize a sketch of the suspect and reward information on billboards along a major highway. The police received hundreds of tips, which took time to investigate. Notably, multiple tips mentioned the same individual, Teddy Hoover, who owned an old Ford pickup truck and worked in pool maintenance. His appearance matched the suspect's sketch, making it unlikely to be a coincidence. The police launched a search for Teddy Hoover and found his address in Kansas. When they arrived, Teddy answered the door, appearing surprised and nervous. However, this reaction didn't necessarily imply guilt, as many people become nervous when confronted by the police. When questioned about his whereabouts on June 18, 2002, Teddy claimed he couldn't remember, which was understandable given the year time lapse. Teddy denied any involvement in maintaining the pool where Alexandra worked. Nevertheless, the detectives asked him to provide a voluntary DNA sample to rule him out as a suspect. Teddy declined, stating he needed to consult with a lawyer first. He promised to contact the police after speaking with his attorney. The next day, Teddy's lawyer reached out to the investigators, expressing his client's concerns about his DNA sample being added to a database. Teddy reportedly believed in various conspiracy theories and feared that if he cooperated with the police, they would use the information against him in other cases. In an effort to alleviate his concerns, the investigators promised not to enter his DNA into any database and only use it to compare with the DNA found on Alexandra Kemp. The lawyer agreed to speak with his client and said he would call back. As they waited for the call, the police reviewed the case materials again and stumbled upon a piece of paper in one of the folders with a name that caught their attention. On the day of Alexandra's death, detectives began questioning onlookers who had gathered by the pool, trying to determine if anyone had seen anything suspicious. Interestingly, one of the people they spoke with was Teddy Hoover, who had claimed he had never been to the crime scene before. As the investigation continued, detectives grew increasingly confident that Teddy Hoover might be the man they had been searching for over the past 2 years. After several days, investigators contacted Teddy's lawyer to ask if his client was willing to provide a DNA sample. However, the lawyer responded by stating that his client had refused his services and broken off contact. Police immediately went to Teddy's house, but he had already escaped. As a result, the 29-year-old suspect was placed on the National Wanted list. Despite the efforts of the detectives, Teddy managed to evade capture for months. Billboards featuring his image were still up, but the search had yielded nothing. It wasn't until September 2004, when an anonymous caller contacted the police, that a new lead emerged. According to the caller, he knew the name of Teddy's girlfriend, with whom Teddy was living in Kansas. Detectives sought to locate Laura Barr, a woman connected to Teddy Hoover, but discovered she had left the state at the same time he escaped. This led them to investigate further. The U.S. Postal Service informed the Kansas State Police that Laura was receiving mail in Litchfield, Connecticut, along with a man named Benjamin Appleby, at the same address. The house where they resided was secluded and located in a rural area. Authorities suspected that Benjamin Appleby might be an alias for Teddy Hoover. To aid in the investigation, detectives from Leawood contacted the Connecticut State Police, requesting their assistance in locating Benjamin. It was discovered that he had a prior record in Connecticut, with an outstanding arrest warrant stemming from a 1997 incident where he had exposed himself to a schoolgirl. However, Benjamin had evaded capture and fled the state. With the existing warrant, detectives proceeded to the address associated with Benjamin's mail. Upon arrival, they found him at home and immediately took him into custody. As suspected, Benjamin Appleby was confirmed to be Teddy Hoover. It was revealed that while detectives in Kansas had been seeking a DNA sample from Teddy in connection with Alexandra Kemp's death, he had returned to Connecticut and resumed using his real name, attempting to maintain a low profile and escape notice. To apprehend Benjamin, detectives from Leawood traveled to Connecticut, anticipating that he would once again claim innocence. Before bringing him in for questioning, they devised a plan to unsettle him. They filled the interrogation room with crime scene photos and pictures of Alexandra, and placed folders with his name on the table, creating the illusion that the investigation had substantial evidence against him. When Benjamin entered the interrogation room, he was visibly shaken and unable to speak. A detective confronted him, inquiring about the implications of obtaining his DNA sample. Shortly after, Benjamin broke down in tears, confessing to Alexandra's death. He then recounted the events of the fateful June day, explaining that he had noticed Alexandra, found her attractive, and attempted to flirt with her. When she entered the pump room, he followed her, locked the door, and trapped her inside. When Benjamin touched she fought back, leaving him feeling humiliated. In a fit of anger, he attacked her, beating and strangling her until she lost consciousness. Benjamin then attempted to take advantage of her body, undressing her partially. He retrieved a tube of antiseptic gel from a first aid kit, intending to use it as a lubricant. However, just as he was about to proceed, the sound of a car horn distracted him. The victim's friend, who was waiting in a car behind a fence, had noticed something was amiss and sounded the horn. Fearing he would be caught, Benjamin hastily covered the body and fled the scene. Later, Benjamin returned to the area, where he encountered Alexandra's friend, whom he greeted with a smile and a wave, trying to appear nonchalant. He then got into his pickup truck and drove away. Hours later, Benjamin returned to the crime scene again, this time blending in with the crowd of onlookers gathered near the pool. The DNA evidence ultimately led to Benjamin's downfall. Tests revealed that the DNA found on the tube of antiseptic gel and on Alexandra's body matched Benjamin's. Thanks in large part to the efforts of investigator Roger Kemp, the police were finally able to identify the man responsible for Alexandra's murder, more than 2 years after the crime was committed. Benjamin Appleby claimed he initially wanted to plead guilty to avoid putting Alexandra's family through further emotional distress. However, at his first court hearing, he suddenly declared his innocence, stating that his confession was made under duress. Despite this, DNA analysis revealed that his DNA was the only sample found on the victim's body, making it difficult to dispute his involvement. Benjamin's lawyers attempted to argue that their client did not intentionally take Alexandra's life, admitting that he was responsible for her death but claiming it was not premeditated. However, forensic experts pointed out that Benjamin had strangled Alexandra for approximately 10 minutes, during which time he could have stopped but chose not to. The prosecution argued that Benjamin's sole intention was to observe Alexandra. On the day of the incident, June 18, 2002, the pool area was empty due to cloudy weather, allowing Benjamin to take advantage of the situation. He was found guilty by a jury in December 2005 and sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 50 years, as well as an additional 19 years for attempting to force Alexandra into intimacy. In 2019, Benjamin appealed the decision, but the court upheld the life imprisonment sentence for first-degree murder. The Court of Appeal also ruled that the attempt to force Alexandra into intimacy was already taken into account during the initial sentencing. Benjamin was sentenced twice for the same crime, prompting the court to overturn the second conviction. However, even if Benjamin is released on parole, he will be 81 years old by that time. The authorities involved in the case credit Roger Kemp's persistence for helping them catch the culprit. While Benjamin was in prison, Roger and his wife established a self-defense program for girls, teaching thousands of girls and women across the country basic self-defense techniques. Roger Kemp's tireless efforts to bring attention to the case and his work in creating a safe community did not go unnoticed. He was awarded the Presidential Citizens Medal by Barack Obama at the White House. Until his passing at 77 on March 1, 2022, Roger continued to work for the foundation he established in his daughter's name. His ultimate goal was to make a difference in at least one person's life. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Aya Hashim. The Hashim family moved to the UK from Lebanon in November 2011, seeking a safer and more promising future. Aya's father, Ismail, wanted his children to have a good education and become valuable member of society. He applied for asylum for himself and his family, and after receiving a residence permit, they settled in Blackburn. Aya was a driven and ambitious young woman with big plans for her life. She was a law student at Salford University. Tragically, her parents' hopes for a better life were shattered when Aya was killed in a senseless act of violence. On May 17, 2020, Aya left her house to go to a nearby supermarket at around 3 p.m. However, she never returned home. About an hour later, Aya's father went out to look for her. Aya's mother searched online and discovered the news that a woman had been shot in their neighborhood. Soon after, Aya's parents received the devastating news that their daughter had been killed in the shooting. Aya was walking on King Street when a car drove by with multiple occupants. One of the individuals in the car fired 2 shots, one of which fatally hit Aya. 19-year-old Aya Hashim was fatally shot on King Street and died the same day despite medical efforts. The police do not think the incident was motivated by racism or religious hatred. Deputy Chief Terry Woods is seeking the public's help in gathering evidence. He asks anyone with dashcam footage or surveillance cameras to come forward if they have recordings of a green Toyota Avensis car or any suspicious activity. According to Deputy Chief Woods, Aya was an innocent bystander who was shopping for her family when she was accidentally caught in the crossfire. The shooting involved a green Toyota Avensis car. Witnesses report that 2 rounds were fired from the vehicle, and sadly, Aya was hit. Later that day, police discovered the Toyota Avensis car involved in the shooting abandoned near the scene of the crime. They also obtained CCTV footage of the incident. The footage shows that at 3:03 p.m. Aya is walking along the sidewalk. The Toyota mentioned earlier drives past her. The rear side window on the left is down. The shooter makes a fatal shot. The bullet goes through her and hits the pole. For ethical reasons, the police did not reveal footage of she falling to the ground. After reviewing the video recording, it's clear that there were at least 2 individuals in the car, the driver and the shooter. Following the shooting, the perpetrators quickly fled the scene and abandoned the vehicle on a nearby street. Within 2 hours, the police located the car and initiated a search for its owner. Aya Hashim was caught in the crossfire of a shooting incident that occurred near Khan's car wash. Following her death, the police launched a massive operation to apprehend the suspects, who had fled the UK, with the assistance of international law enforcement. 8 individuals were initially charged in connection with her death. Aya's death was ultimately determined to be a tragic accident. She was an innocent bystander. The shooting was actually a targeted attack on the owner of Khan's car wash, who was a competitor of Pharaoh Suleiman. It was Suleiman who allegedly hired a hitman to take out Khan, but the bullet mistakenly hit Aya instead. According to the video recording, at the time of the incident, Aya was standing a few feet away from a pole. The first bullet fired missed its intended target and hit something near a man, as evidenced by the splashing water. The key point here is that the shooter made a mistake. The person they aimed at was not the business owner, but rather an employee who was mistaken for Khan. During the second shot, Aya was positioned between the shooter and the employee. The bullet struck her in the left side of her chest, passed through her body, and then hit the pole. The car immediately fled the scene. The car wash owner, Khan, witnessed Aya falling to the ground and rushed to her aid, calling emergency services in the process. He described the events, stating that he had seen the car and the gun, and then the assailant sped away. According to him, they returned and started shooting, aiming the gun at him, which left him confused. To better understand the crime, let's examine the roles of the individuals involved. We'll start with the mastermind, Pharaoh Suleiman. Pharaoh Suleiman was a successful businessman with a loving family. Suleiman owned a thriving tires shop that had gained significant popularity over time. The business provided him with a substantial income, enabling him and his family to live a comfortable life. He was also active on social media, frequently sharing photos of himself driving expensive cars, giving his followers a glimpse into his life. When his business began to decline, he devised a plan to eliminate his competitor, Couldnt. Despite being a potential suspect due to his motive, Suleiman went ahead with the plan. He enlisted the help of Ayaz Hussein, Zamir Raja, and Anthony Ennis. The perpetrators conducted a surveillance mission the day before the crime, driving near the car wash to inspect the area. Additionally, Abu Bakr Saisha purchased the Toyota used in the crime with money provided by Suleiman. Kashif Manzur ensured the car was in working condition by performing technical checks and addressing any malfunctions. Uthman Saisha and his girlfriend, Judy Chapman, played a supporting role in the crime. They drove the shooter and driver to the location of the Toyota in their Ford Fiesta and then picked them up after the crime was committed, they abandoning the Toyota on a nearby street. According to the inquest, at 1:14 p.m., Judy Chapman and Uthman Saisha picked up Raja and Ennis from Bolton and drove them 13 miles to Blackburn, where the Toyota was parked. Kashif Manzur made sure the Toyota was ready as all four men drove to Blackburn. However, when they stopped a couple of miles from the car wash, the Toyota wouldn't start due to a dead battery. Manzur jumped the battery using another car's battery and some wires. With the car started, Manzur handed it over to Raja and Ennis, then returned to the service station where Suleiman was waiting, watching from a front row seat to see what would happen. The Toyota approached the corner with its windows rolled down. Ennis and Raja circled the block several times, waiting for the perfect moment to act. They needed to be on the same side of the street as Couldnt's car wash. Meanwhile, Manzur and Suleiman were observing the situation unfold. On the fourth pass by the car wash, the Toyota slowed down. Coincidentally, Couldnt was on the street at that exact moment. However, the shooter, Zamir Raja, made a mistake and fired the first shot at a different employee, not Couldnt. Fortunately, the first bullet missed its target. But the second bullet hit Aya. Following the shooting, Raja and Ennis fled the scene, abandoning their vehicle and getting into a car with Judy Chapman and Uthman Saisha, who drove them away from Blackburn. When police reviewed the video of Suleiman's store, Ayaz Hussein entered the store. Suleiman signaled to the others who were aware of the incident to leave the room and go to the second floor. Abu Bakr Saisha, who had bought the Toyota involved in the crime, was sitting behind them. When Abu Bakr Saisha overheard the police radio mention that the perpetrator's car had been found, he immediately got up to discuss something with Suleiman. 9 days after Aya's murder, Zamir Raja, the shooter, fled to Portugal and met Anthony Ennis, the driver of the Toyota, at Lisbon Airport. Both men had escaped the country. Meanwhile, the police were arresting the individuals involved in the crime. Pharaoh Suleiman, the mastermind, was arrested on May 18, the day after Aya's murder. Abu Bakr Saisha was arrested on May 19, and Judy Chapman and Uthman Saisha were arrested on May 20. Ayaz Hussein and Kashif Manzur were arrested on May 21. Zamir Raja, who had hoped to return to England without being detected, was arrested at a London train station on June 6. Anthony Ennis was caught in Spain on July 4 and extradited to the UK. Aya Hashim was murdered and Couldnt, the owner of a car wash, was nearly killed in a violent crime. Several suspects were charged, and at first, all of them denied any involvement. However, as the investigation continued and the pressure mounted, their stories began to contradict each other as they tried to downplay their roles in the crime. As the suspects' testimonies became more inconsistent, they started to turn on each other, revealing crucial details about the crime to the police. Each suspect tried to avoid a long prison sentence by blaming the others. On August 5, 2021, the court delivered its verdicts, resulting in severe sentences for all those involved. Pharaoh Solon, who had a prior conviction for a fatal hit-and-run incident in 2001, received a life sentence with a minimum term of 34 years. Raja, the shooter, was also given a life sentence with a minimum term of 34 years. According to reports, he was paid $500 for his involvement in the crime. The driver, Anthony Ennis, was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 33 years. Ayaz Hussein, who orchestrated the crime, received a life sentence with a minimum term of 32 years. Abu Bakr Saisha, who bought the getaway car, will serve at least 28 years. Uthman Satatya, who arranged for the shooter and driver to be transported, will also serve at least 28 years, and Kashif Manzoor, who made sure the car was working on the day of the crime, will serve at least 27 years. The judge was critical of the defendants, stating that they showed no regret for their actions after the shooting. Instead of taking responsibility, they tried to deceive and manipulate their way out of trouble. When that failed, they turned on each other in an attempt to save themselves. Judy Chapman was found guilty in October 2021 of involuntary deprivation of life. She was given a 15-year prison sentence for driving the car involved in the crime. However, investigators have since discovered that other individuals were involved in the crime. This was revealed through analysis of communication between the convicted parties. Louis Otway, a 42-year-old from Manchester, was sentenced to life in prison on May 5, 2023, with a minimum term of 32 years. During his trial, evidence revealed that Otway acted as an intermediary between Ayaz Hussein, Zamir Raja, and Anthony Ennis. Specifically, he assisted Hussein in committing a crime. Another person, Banbridge, was also involved in the case. She was the 10th person to be found guilty. Prosecutors said that Banbridge met with Raja and Ennis in Bolton, took their phones, and turned them off. Then, she drove to Trafford and turned the phones back on in different locations, making it seem like Raja and Ennis were in Greater Manchester, not Blackburn, when a shooting happened. This was done to create a fake alibi for the two men. Banbridge, 32, admitted to conspiracy to pervert the course of justice and was sentenced to 23 months in prison on August 11, 2023. This was the last conviction in the case of Aya Hashim.